Oh, the deadline has.
All our long holidays are over,
I mean, there's still like just the one day, but after that.
and life is like a song. Oh yeah. At last.
Summer break. Hello and welcome to Power Reflections, a proud member of the Tuff Network, where we reflect on Wildbow's most recreational work as it releases. I'm Ruben Morehouse,
And I'm Elliot Diebold.
and we are here in the grand finale, the countdown to the comet, as it were. So as we rapidly approach the end of the story and our 25-hour live stream, let's make sure we talk about some of the awesome segments that we've got coming up. You might think we're approaching the end of the story. I don't see a reason for me to keep entering predictions into the pale predictor form that those two mention every single chapter/episode. But wait, there is a reason. And what's that reason, Elliot?
We are going to be having a segment called like the Pale Predictor Retrospective. We'll probably have some guests on for that.
Yep.
And basically what we're going to do is go through like all the predictions that have sort of ever been put in there, highlight ones that were particularly good, particularly bad, just funny.
Particularly correct or incorrect, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, we'll probably have a bit of variety stuff in there. We might do some awards as part of it. So,
Mm-hmm.
if you want to get your last minute entry in to try and nab up one of those awards, because
Yeah.
some of the giveaways and prizes we're doing are going to be pretty fun.
Yeah,
So,
it
yeah.
would be pretty easy to get the award for worst prediction. So send those in using the Pale Predictor form, which you can find linked down in the show notes. Now, should we get into the chapters for this week, Elliot?
Yeah, let's do it.
Only 2 chapters. Oof. Back
Easy.
to normal. Yeah. Starting with Summer Break 1310. We're in Lucy's head, and we're kind of jumping straight into the heads of the Kenneteers as they're at the BHI, and they have just seen Charles and Marcy escape. They decide to check in on Ray and just gather as many clues as they can.
Yeah, and it's sort of worth pointing out something we forgot to highlight last week. I think we actually wrote it down and then just missed it in the fucking hours of notes we were sifting through. The craziest thing about Maricica's plan isn't just that, she got past all of these incredibly powerful and organized practitioners. It's really the fact that she got 2 forsworn people to do it.
Yeah.
That's the huge part of her victory is like these guys are literally the universe does what it can to shoot them in the face.
To fuck their stuff over, for sure.
Yeah, and she managed to puppet a plan that got the 2 of them to get themselves out.
Yeah, I think part of it, the thing that was so interesting about it was this angle of things had been set up to people ignore them and don't pay attention to them and stuff, right? So there's almost an advantage to being forsworn.
Well, it's the way it's sort of phrased is it's like if it's something good, they're the people you don't think about. If it's something bad, they're the people you first think about. But yeah, exactly. Like Maricica sort of weaponized the fact that they get looked over by the important people, which is that's not really a metaphor for anything, but I guess just because one of Lucy's big thoughts at the start of this chapter is she's constantly looking around thinking, oh, they tore this place to shreds and they got out like it was trivial, and this whole thing is a bit of a reality check for the Kenneteers. Like as you mentioned at the start of last week's episode, Verona went through her list and was like, well, the one thing we've got nailed down is that we caught Charles. And that's obviously been torn away from them. So we're entering this chapter and the 3 of them are very much in a headspace now of, hey, wait, are we totally fucked?
Yeah, and that obviously comes up a lot in this chapter and next chapter for Lucy.
Yeah.
But yeah, it really is.
Sorry. I was just going to say, but it's like, it really is like just the icing on that cake of they're totally fucked now is that, it was 2 forsworn people that managed to do it. It reminds me of do you remember right at the start of the story, we'd always get told, you girls are in way over your heads. And, things like 1.Z basically existed to let the Kenneteers know this was so much worse than they thought. And I think over 13 arcs, we've seen them grow into badasses. And I guess I kind of had started to forget a bit how even after they've grown so much in this story, this shit is still so far above what they should be doing as 13-year-olds.
Yeah.
And this is like the story reminding them and us by having Charles get broken out here. Just like, hey, remember these are like three teenagers fighting like a fairy who's had 10 years to plan this shit.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Um, I think even Mariska told them they were in over their heads at the time, and yeah.
Well, yeah, it's just yeah, it was a feeling I hadn't really thought that clearly since the start of the story. In a way,
Mm.
really took me back to remembering when they were, letting Marissa dress them up in glamour and going and kissing girls and stuff. Like, just that level of you guys are out of your depth.
Yeah, 100%.
Uh, I I also like again. I love being back at the Blue Heron Institute, even though it's only for like a chapter and a bit. Like Durashay offers to heal Ray, and he's like, "Oh, thanks. Would I still be human afterwards?" And she's just like, "Oh, maybe I could get like Ulysses or Amy." Like, yeah, I just miss all these kooky PHI people.
Yeah, it was funny. After I saw you read that, it made me think like, yeah, Durashay is almost too powerful to be useful in a lot of situations. Like the
Yeah,
eyes thing is a good example, but also she summoned this giant beast to try and stop what was going on, but like, it was too big to really do anything, right? Like without fucking up the school, which it kind of did. Like we,
yeah.
we get a lot of beats of the school lawn and foundations being absolutely fucked now, which is just kind of wild. Like Durashay isn't able to do anything in moderation, and that means that
Yeah.
she's actually maybe not that useful.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. She's got like a big arsenal, but they're all
Yeah,
nuclear weapons, and it's
yeah,
like you can't use a nuclear weapon to stop a bank robbery. Like,
yeah. Or they have a duty of care to the students that mean that
yeah,
Durashay can't necessarily go ham.
yeah. So she's either doing an extremely compromised version of what she can, or like, yeah, she almost just kind of like I felt the most useful thing you could do with someone like Durashay outside of I assume her controlling all of these insane giant powerful monsters is probably pretty handy. Considering
True.
it took Ted like 100,000 goes to get one of them. So like, that's obviously like a huge part of her usefulness, but like also just imagine in like the context of the school, I guess it's nice to know that like I guess the same way nukes are used as a kind of
Like a deterrent.
peacekeeping, like yeah,
Mm,
nobody's gonna fuck with the school while Durashay's there because like she'll get you back.
mm. Yeah, that's a fair point. That's but again, like you don't have to pull that trigger and start
No,
nuclear war, right?
no, exactly. Like, yeah, it's far from ideal. Like I think I've seen discussions on this as well. Like, it's interesting how she and Ray are almost exact opposites in the way they've gathered too much power that they can't use.
Mm,
Like, she's got this incredibly deadly power that she's constantly having to hold back, whereas like Ray's gathered this sort of accidental political power that everyone else is holding him back from doing anything with.
mm.
And yeah, yeah, I do find her interesting. I'm sad that this wasn't the sort of story where we could have spent so much more time with Durashay.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe we'll get more Durashay in a future story
I love
because
that.
she feels like the kind of character that Wildbow would really enjoy having around more. Not necessarily as a protagonist, but as a kind of regular supporting character.
Yeah, or if you had a protagonist who was like Bree, right? Like the sort of person who's going to end
Mm,
up
mm.
having to cross paths with Durashay just because you
Or
need
just
an expert in giant shit.
Brie.
Yeah.
That's the bro tag.
Oh yeah, I'd love that. Last thing here though, just again a quick shout out. Like, Amine started coming up again, and I was like, "What's Amine's deal again?" And so I just went to the student guide and looked it up, and I was like, it was almost a year to the day before this chapter that the student guide came out, and it's still delivering a year later. Like,
Mm.
MVP extra material student guide.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, at the school, talk turns to how they can recapture Charles and Marcy, but they pretty quickly realize that that's just not going to happen, and they've gotten away. So yeah, they've escaped. It happened.
Yeah, although so I guess the interesting thing we really start to see both in this chapter and the next one, like the Kennedys seem to take this new strategy to heart. Like Estrella and Ray essentially start
Mm,
teaching them that like you want to keep trying to close the doors on these fairy schemes, even though there will be a way around like each one. Like Even though it's like, oh, Marisica may not take the fairy realms to get there because blah blah blah, but we'll still shut them off just in case.
Yeah.
And I think like both me and the Kenneteers were for a second like, well, what's the point? You're expending resources on something she can get around and she probably isn't doing anyway. But I think this is actually really smart because like fairies aren't like they're not Contessa from Worm, right? Like they don't have a guaranteed path. They
Yeah.
rely on having the ability to adapt and take like 100 different strategies. And so just like, closing off parts of the board, it at least means she can't use it later.
Yeah, it's very much a like, despite the fact that it might not hamper them right now, you don't want you try want to try and make sure they have as few options as possible because it will allow them to improvise in a more constrained space. You need to kind of keep closing doors on a Fae until they have no doors left. You can't
Yeah.
just, let them go through whatever doors they want.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's almost a trap they're letting you fall into by thinking, "Oh, well, there's no point because I'll have a way around it." What that means is, if they hadn't done this, Marisica might have access to the fairy courts a day from now. Whereas it sounds like
Mm,
Estrella's going to keep that shit locked down for the next few days.
yeah,
And like, obviously, this doesn't seem like the ideal way to handle a fairy because, like, the thing is, especially with how long Marisica's been planning this, they might need to close like 1,000 doors before they actually get to the point where they can corner her.
yeah,
Um, so like it may not actually work, but it's like at this stage they don't have a better option, right? Like it's too late to just not be involved. So yeah, I don't know. It was interesting because yeah, like Ray comes up with this whole thing about how this is a river and you're trying to dam it, and if there are like any leaks, something can get through. But obviously, the sort of second part of that they start to address is so close off as many as you can though.
yeah. I think the thing that this made land for me is the idea of like, and this is relevant for Lucy this chapter and next chapter, the idea that when you're up against a fairy, it's gonna feel like you're about like they're so far ahead of you the entire time until suddenly you beat them, right? This is
Yeah,
what it felt like in the conflict with I can't even remember her name, but the fake
Finia.
Marisica. Yeah. It felt like the Kennedys were so on the back foot, but then suddenly they got one or two good things in and it all just fell apart, right?
Yeah, great point. Yeah,
Because, as I think it's Estrella says, like, the Fae are going to make you think that what has happened was their whole plan the entire way along, but it wasn't. They're
yeah,
just good at adapting, and so you need to shut off so many routes they don't have any plans that they can adapt to, right? And so it's going to feel like, I mean, like Charles's Escape is an example. Feels like Mariska had that planned all along, but there's a world where if they hadn't sent Charles away, it would have been worse for them because Mariska wouldn't have had to expend time and resources and energy on this stuff, right? Like,
yeah, yeah.
we
Exactly. It's
don't,
like they don't
yeah,
they fairy. My impression of fairies, they don't have a plan. They're juggling 100 variations of the plan. Like, yeah, they have 100 avenues that they're going to sort of take. What you're doing is just trying to close off those avenues one by one, basically,
yeah,
which
yeah,
is like inefficient and shitty. But like at the point the Kenneteers are in, that's all they've got aside from plan for the aftermath. But we'll get there later.
yeah.
Um, the other thing that jumped out to me. So obviously, like Mercer and Charles are gone, and the assumption that we're sort of making at this point is because the arena and the Carmine realm have sort of blended. All they really have to do is walk away from civilization for 24 hours, and they'll end up in the arena.
Mm.
And they talk about they can still stop and resupply and all that, and just that made me think like that's the interlude I want is like Marissa and Charles sitting around the campfire cooking dinner and like making small
Eating
talk,
Pop
like.
Tarts or whatever.
Yeah, like, what does it look like when the two of them are chilling?
I'm sure it would be horrific.
It's funny because like Marisica doesn't strike me as the like silent ignore him type,
Mm,
but also like it'd be boring to just bully him for 24 hours. Like,
mm.
yeah, I don't know. I'd just be so curious. I'd love to be a fly on a wall on like the two of them like just waiting around.
Yeah, I can imagine it'd be a fun scene. Maybe we'll get that interlude. Maybe that'll be break 3. Is
Them
Marissa and
taking a
Charles
break.
taking a break on their journey. Yeah. So yeah, the team takes Ray back to his office and he gives some advice to the Kenneteers about, what he would do differently given the fact that Charles has just escaped. Advice about the situation and their options.
Yeah, it's worth pointing out, he also asks to be quickly taken back to his office because now that he's blind, if there's a sign of weakness on his end, that is very, very bad, and he doesn't go into it, but obviously having just read Break One, I was like, "Oh yeah, shit, if he's gonna be blind for a while, that, like, potentially has global ramifications for, like, so much shit." Like, we saw last chapter just how fucking
How much stuff was on his plate, yeah.
yeah, and, like, so much of it, like, global. Like, if Gold Garden or something, like, fall apart, it's they'll get replaced or whatever, like, it's not gonna rock the foundations of the practice, but it's gonna be a big deal.
Yeah, the thing that this put into my head is, like, the students are gonna probably respect Ray even less now, and I can imagine his headmastery life just being a fucking nightmare.
Yeah, because you're right, that's the other job he's still gotta fucking deal with, yeah. Oh, can we just need to get Master out, so then,
Crow.
oh god, what's that family name? Louisa and Maurice?
They're
I've forgotten their
crows.
surname. Sorry,
Isn't
I
it
keep
Crow?
talking over you.
Crow, crow, crow.
Crows. Sorry, I think the delay meant I kept not hearing what you were saying. Yeah, the crows. And like I guess the other thing that jumped out to me here is Ray has this one point where he makes this distinction between anger and resentment. Where he says, anger is something you eventually get over, whereas like by the time it builds to resentment, like that's it. And he sort of talks about how Charles has been stewing in his shit for a decade, and his resentment is very distilled. And Lucy starts to wonder what falls into what category for her, and I just thought this was really interesting because obviously it's been a while since we talked about the sort of mapping that exists between the three major culprits and our like trio of Kenneteers. And I guess I'd forgotten to account for the fact that as the story really starts to wrap up, the mapping between the flaws of the culprits and the flaws of the Kenneteers that they're overcoming would sort of become a bit more like important and overt. Um, like obviously, we've been talking so much recently about how Charles is someone who lost himself to this resentment and anger, and we just forgot to bring it back to the fact that as he's the sort of stand-in for Lucy in our trio of villains, like it's really worth comparing him to Lucy, who's somebody who through her events has actually like she was heading in that direction at the start of the story, and she's managed to turn it around, and now she's becoming uh not more forgiving, but like less, burn it all downy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I guess it's good that the Kenneteers seem to be a more rational version of the, less fixed in their ways and their flaws than their mirrored, conspirators.
I mean, that's what makes a good villain, right? Is a good villain is like a bad
Mm,
reflection of the
mm,
protagonist, and
yeah.
I think this is why. Like, I'm almost positive if I went back and listened to what about arc 1 or 2 episodes, one of us would have briefly said like there'll probably be 3 villains, and each one will reflect the protagonist in some way. Like, it's just
I
because
mean,
it's
there
good.
have been a lot of trios of three people
Yeah,
that we've loved to draw connections to, so I'm sure that's happened.
and like we've talked, I think like when we learnt about Maricica's motivations in her interlude, we talked about this comparison between the three of them because it was
Yeah.
like, oh, that's specifically how she relates to Verona. It's not just like,
Yes.
oh, because they're both like, girls of the night. Like there's actually she's trying not to become fairy.
Girls of the Night.
I don't know. Like I'm trying to think of a way to
What does
say
that
like
mean, Elliot?
because they're
Sounds
both
like
into
they're
like gothy dark.
escorts.
Oh shit! No, I didn't mean that. I forgot that was a thing. No, I meant like just
Anywho.
because they're into dark shit,
Right, yeah.
like the goth vibe, I
Goths,
guess.
yeah.
Yeah, but no, so like I guess it's just been a while since we touched on that sort of comparison. I guess this brought it back into my mind, and like yeah, so it's interesting sort of seeing like Charles got continually beat down by the universe and became
Mm,
somebody who was lost to resentment. Lucy's been
yeah.
given a second chance, and it's like on her to use it.
Mm,
And it
yeah.
makes me like excited now to like I, I like when we get the moment where Verona learns why Maricica's doing what she's doing, to try and compare it to her own shit going on, and
Yeah, maybe they'll team up.
that would be a twist. And yeah, it also makes me like think that I'm now starting to suspect that Edith actually might get out of her prison at some point. just because it does feel kind of weird for the Avery of our trio to just
Yes.
not be in it. From Arc 11, like I hadn't thought about it in that way, and through that lens, I'm like, yeah, it's a bit weird that. I mean, I guess that would be Avery's MO is just disappear for a couple of months, but like just trying to think in story as well. Obviously, I'm jumping ahead, but they hide Jabba soon, and the only other person who knows where Jabba is apart from Verona is Matthew. Um, Seems like Marissa could use Edith to get at Matthew somehow.
Horrifying. A horrifying thing to say. So yeah, almost certainly it's going to happen. So yeah, back in Kennet, Lucy helps Verona pack for her trip back to her dad's, and the pair kind of reconcile a bit, which is quite nice.
Yeah. I mean, this chapter does a really fun thing where after each little Blue Heron Institute like establishing shot, we then cut away to a segment of the next day that's like relevant.
Yeah, we
Um,
get like Ray gives a 2 or 3 paragraph summary of like, and make sure you do this, and then we
yeah,
cut to how that's playing into Lucy's life the next day.
yeah, like, and it's really fun. But like, it even happens in this next bit here, even after that long BHI section that starts the chapter. Like Ray does all this stuff talking about like anger and resentment, and you can sort of see that like Lucy and Verona start this conversation. I think both of them coming from a place of like some bad shit has happened, and I think particularly on Verona's end, Verona is worried it might turn into resentment, and neither of them want that. And they're sort of like this conversation is almost the two of them trying to make sure that they can repair that bridge before it gets too bad.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, it's nice. It's not like it's not perfect. Obviously, it's not. You still feel the the gap between them a bit, but
Oh yeah, this conversation didn't just fix it all. Like,
exactly. But it is going into the finale, going into the inevitable scene where Mariska reveals that Avery is leaving. I'm glad that the trio gets a chance to, you know, get on the right foot beforehand.
yeah, and like something to note is even though this conversation doesn't go perfectly, and I want to talk about the conversation in depth in a sec, but like it is worth pointing out that even during the tensest part of it, where it seems like they're least on the same page, the second the door starts to open and they think it's about Verona having to leave now, they instantly like grab each other's hands, which
Yeah,
is like
true.
that moment of like this is still very much like their friendship is a lot stronger than this fight
Yeah,
that's going on
they
right
still
now.
instinctivally reach for each other.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like it's not resentment yet, and I'm really glad that the two of them are trying to nip this in the bud before they let it get there. Because like yeah, I guess to talk about like just the actual conversation they had. I love that it's like Verona basically finally manages to put it in a context that Lucy can understand. Like I suppose you could argue Lucy's doing a better job
Mm.
of listening now, but like I think one of the big problems here has always been that like Lucy doesn't quite get Verona because like Verona's a bit weird, like proudly so. But like Verona basically just has to say to Lucy like the fact that I had I yelled at you is for me the equivalent of you knifing Paul's car. And what I love about them is just like the second Verona says that, like Lucy just kind of, she gets it. I mean, she doesn't get it, but like even later on in this chapter, there's like a moment where Verona like says one small complainy thing, and Lucy's like, "Hey, if Verona like has that like if that other thing's like that for Verona, maybe her just complaining like this is actually means it's really bad, and I should give her a hug." And it was like, yes, finally, that is exactly what it is.
Yeah, Lucy finally kind of getting on Verona's wavelength there, I think is it's good. It's a good moment. It feels like they're back on the same wavelength. As we said, not perfectly, but pretty good.
Well, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't actually say back on because I think like
Sure.
Lucy not quite getting Verona has been like a thing since the start.
I think
Um,
there's been a bit of them not quite getting each other. We got Lucy was a lot better at, I guess, not putting her foot down. That's not the right word, but asking a bit more actively for what she needed from Verona. And I think Verona was is not as assertive as Lucy, and so was only very recently able to do that.
Yeah, I think like Verona is perhaps understandably annoyed that she kind of has to spell it out for Lucy like this, but
Mm.
I mean, I guess I don't know what to say, but like, too bad. Like,
Yeah.
I guess you have to. Like, that feels like a shitty way to phrase it, but like I know it sucks, and like I think it sucks mostly because like Verona still has a massive chip on her shoulder with regards to being complainy or asking for things. And so it's almost like these two aspects of her have collided to just make this like in an ideal world, she could have just sort of had this conversation with Lucy like 5 arcs ago, and it kind of would have been fine. Um,
Mm.
but better late than never. Um, but yeah, I guess I do still worry for Verona because immediately after they do have this conversation, Verona kind of pivots straight to, I'm sorry, I'm being a bitch and I'm complaining," and I'm
Yes.
just like, we still have not got Verona past this part of what her dad has sort of done to her relationship with
Yeah, feeling
vulnerability.
allowed to be vulnerable, feeling
Yeah,
allowed to, voice concerns and criticisms.
yeah. So like, yeah, it's like it's like this big moment because Verona does sort of finally do that enough where they can have this conversation. I feel really good about where the two of them are heading from here. But then also Verona does follow it up with like basically a warning signal that it's like, but also I'm not all the way there yet. Like this was still
Yeah,
a
yeah.
big deal for me to be able to have this conversation. Um,
Yeah.
I
And
just
she
remember,
says that she feels bad, that she regrets what she said to Jeremy and kind of letting Jeremy in a bit. And I'm like,
yeah,
no, Verona, no.
that
It
was
was
really
so
good.
good. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Especially because like it's almost unfair to Jeremy who handled it fucking perfectly.
Yeah, he did very well, didn't he?
But yeah, so I just remember I think it was in one of last week's chapters. It's all a bit of a blur because it's been so many chapters recently. But like I feel like Lucy and Avery. Oh no, was it Lucy said to Avery that she should try out therapy? Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. I was just thinking. I'm sure
I can't
somebody.
place it. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm sure somebody at some point recently told one of them to do therapy. I was thinking one of them's Verona. Maybe it's not. But anyway, I guess that should be somebody should try and get Verona into therapy. I think she does need a therapist to start to tell her that it's okay to be a bit vulnerable. But I suppose I just kind of recommend almost everybody does therapy.
Mm,
It's a bit of a. I feel like there's like a lot of people it is helpful for.
yeah, definitely. Um, Yeah. Uh, so yeah, I mean, interestingly, Verona has a lot of thoughts here, and we're about to get her going to spend the time with her dad, and then also we get Avery who's going to go and spend time with her mum. I know we'll get to this in a bit, but like, I don't know, the fact that they're both those stories are happening in the background of this in the next chapter makes me a little nervous.
Yeah. I had that thought like while I was like live reading this, and I sort of noticed that as well. I was like, "Holy shit, what's about to happen to Lucy? That this is the perspective Wildbow chose for this
Yeah.
night.
Oh,
That
and
like
how
Verona,
that pays off. Oof.
yeah, but no, you're right. Like I sort of I have it somewhere in the notes. I think it's like towards the end of the chapter, but like particularly with Verona, we haven't seen into either of the other two Cannoneers' heads since these presumably very upsetting nights for each of them, and
Mm,
they both sort of spent everything else we're seeing here, like this night, having Lucy's back with John. But like we get little clues that they're also both dealing with a lot of their own shit, and I can't wait to get back in their heads. And like, I think even though we don't see that night from their perspectives, we're going to be seeing the effects of both of their nights from their perspectives.
yeah, definitely. Um,
But
I
sorry, last point I wanted to make on this conversation with Verona and Lucy about their friendship. Verona like expresses like this, this worry she has about like being broken, and that like sort of she's heading in a bad direction in some ways. Like I can't remember the exact phrasing now. I didn't copy it into the notes, but
mm,
something like, "Oh, I'm a bit broken, and some of the
yeah,
bad things that you were worried about are happening to me."
yeah,
And like, this is just the extra part of the alarm bells for me because I think, like, we can all pretty confidently say that that's not quite what's happening to her. She's making a lot of strides and growth that she's not really appreciating, and she's too harsh on
yeah,
herself. But obviously, like, I'm very concerned that that is her headspace as she's about to go and spend the night with her dad, and then also presumably move back in with him. Like, that's not the way I want her thinking about the world. She's about to go and spend a night in that hellish household.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Like, there's obviously been so much growth for Verona, but also she spent so much time out of that house. Who knows what's going to happen when she's back in it? Yeah, I guess it's reassuring that that's going to be after the story's over, mostly, which means
Sorta, yeah.
hopefully, like if the story's over by that time, there can't be any huge dramas because otherwise, Wildbow would want to write about them.
Yeah, like, theoretically, we will have a lot more bandwidth to deal with this shit in 24 hours after these 2 chapters are done.
But
Um,
also, if the story's done, we can just be like, and then it worked out happily
yeah.
ever after, and mentally wash our hands of the whole thing.
I mean, now
Which would
that
be
we know
bad
that
if she was real, but because she's fictional, it's fine.
well, yeah, but now that we know that everything that sort of happened was a Marisica plot, that means this story is a fairy tale, so it's gonna have a happy ending. That's fine.
So, moving on.
You don't like my fairy tale joke?
No, I thought it was great. I thought it was so good, Elliot, that I just
I
sat
had
there
to
in
I
stunned silence for a
had
bit
to
to give the audience time to laugh.
Yeah, but our audio process removes long silences. It's just gonna sound like you
Whoops.
moved on immediately.
Oh, no. um, I just want to call this out quickly because it was a line that I thought was quite fun. Verona calls out that Lucy doesn't listen sometimes, which is dumb with the earring as an implement, which I just thought was like, Verona, I don't think you understand. The whole point of this is that this implement amplifies a strength, but also exacerbates a weakness. That's the whole deal with this universe.
Yeah. It is a good burn though.
Yeah, it was solid. So yeah, Avery and Snowdrop come in and crash the friend party. God, we don't want you here, Avery. Okay, jeez. Anyway,
Snowdrop's fine, but
yeah, Snowdrop's good. Verona gives some parting picture gifts, and then the intruding girls here head to their respective worrying home situations.
yeah, leaving Lucy all alone in her one nice home
Yeah,
situation for now.
and yeah, for now.
Uh, I love this moment where Avery basically says, "Oh, can I just have all these pictures?" And Snowdrop chimes in, basically saying, "Oh, congrats, you're finally learning how to be a bit greedy." And Avery's like, "Oh, maybe I won't take them then." And Verona like has to fucking force them on her. It's just like it's just such a great little moment of this is sort of something Avery has been trying to do, like get a bit better at standing for what she wants and like asking for what she needs. And then the second, because the way Snowdrop does it, like when Snowdrop kind of congratulates her on being a bit better at this, Avery tries to back out, and it's like luckily Verona is just a good friend. Is like, no, fuck you, take this gift. We'll slowly but surely get Avery to the point where she has a solid backbone.
Yeah, although, yeah, maybe one day. um, so yeah, I think it's nice for both of them that Avery took all the pictures, right? I feel like Verona needed a bit of an ego boost.
Yeah, and it's nice for Lucy and Avery to get them. I mean, that's like this is like the ideal gift giving scenario. It's good for
Yeah,
everyone. Like this is Verona gets that good feeling from being appreciated and getting to give something that matters to her away, and they both get to know that she cares. Like this is pretty ideal.
yeah. Um, so yeah, Lucy heads to her room and updates her contingency letter for Jasmine, which is again quite worrying.
Well, I suppose like this is the follow up to the other half of Ray's advice. Like Ray told them, you either figure out how to completely plug the dam, or more realistically, make sure everything's sorted for when the dam bursts.
Yeah,
And I guess this is Lucy considering that part of his advice. And I don't know, I took this as a really good sign because her letter was I don't know how much you remember it. It kind of called for the nuclear option. It was the letter that was like, "Here is the
mm,
witch hunters. Tell them to come in and burn everything down and get these specific others who are whitelisted out." And that's not who Lucy is anymore. And so she kind of cleans it up a bit and turns it into like this is what went wrong, but like just tell people and get safe, which is feels a much better thing to me.
yeah. Removes the as much retribution from it as is appropriate.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely a good marker of Lucy's general growth.
I'd also like this is where we see this sort of very dark joke by the end of it, but like Jazz is convinced that all the mischief the trio are getting up to is because they want to go to this party tomorrow night.
Hmm.
Just a good bit of dramatic irony where you're just sort of reading her thinking she's so clever for figuring out that they want to go to a party. And it's like, oh, lady, you wish these three just wanted to go get sloshed.
Yeah,
Like it's so much worse than that.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, poor Jazz. Um, do you think we're gonna see a Kenneteer die by the end of the story, Elliot,
Um,
or
I,
be
I,
seriously injured or altered or whatever?
my gut instinct is to say no,
Mm,
but I can't honestly tell you if that is like an opinion or like a hope,
I
you
hope.
know?
Yeah,
And we'll talk about that distinction a bit more when we get to our Carmine poll at the end of this episode. But yeah, my gut instinct is no, but I'm struggling to tell if that is what I genuinely believe or whether I just can't emotionally cope with the idea.
yeah. I think just like the fact that we've had these letters a few times and stuff like that really just lands for me. I I see it within the realm of possibility, I suppose, that Walbo would set up some very rough long-term consequences. Maybe not death, but Verona getting turned into a weasel or a cat or whatever by Mariska or something. You know what I mean? Um, I can see Walbo doing that and having it work, especially with all the letters and stuff that we've seen. And that is just very worrying to me. The concept of the stakes for these Kenneteers being very high and also being incredibly dangerous just feels plausible that they could be in real trouble, and I hate it.
My hope is that really what these letters are doing. I've long sort of kind of liked the idea of Jasmine actually getting made aware.
Mm,
I think there's a lot to play with there as
mm,
she's sort of the one good parent. Like I think magic in a lot of ways was set up for particularly Verona as a way to escape like bad real life families. And I think it'd be interesting to kind of explore there are a lot of things that might have gone smoother in some ways if Jasmine was on board. Also worse.
but
Um
that's not a resolution. You know what I mean? That's opening more doors in a time in the story when it feels like doors are starting to close.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess I don't know. I could see some way Jazz starts to become aware with this
Mm,
whole handsome man shit going on, and that
mm,
plays into
mm,
the finale in some way, and then it's like almost a bit like like leaving the most of the exploration of that idea too after the story. But
mm.
I don't know. It's an idea I've gone back and forth on because I've also I've seen so many superhero and or like secret magic-y shows where too many people in the civilian lives find out, and it's sort of I
It
become a little
changes the
bit
dynamic pretty fundamentally, doesn't it?
yeah, and I'm like just a little averse to the idea because I've seen it done so many times and it's usually bad. So I
Well,
always
it's
has
in Arrow, everybody eventually becomes
yeah
a
exactly
superhero, or in The Flash or whatever, right? Like,
yeah the
that's the
CW
vibes that I get from it.
the CW superhero shows are the worst for it,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, which is why I hesitate to read up. But that said, Walbo has fixed tropes like that I don't usually like in stories before. So if that's his plan, I would still trust that he'd probably be able to do it in a way that would feel fair, and interesting. So I can see it happening, and that would be like Lucy's letter would be the one. It's the one we've checked in on. It's the one that would fit into that theory.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, So yeah, Lucy is unable to sleep, and so she grabs an ice cream bar and heads outside, where she hears Rook sneaking up on her. They chit chat about old war stories, which eventually bores her to sleep.
That is a fair representation of this
That's
scene.
how it goes. Yeah, Grandma Rook comes out and tells her stories from the war, and she falls asleep. That's what happens, Elliot.
I mean, I really love the vibe of this whole like these stories really do sit halfway between a fairy tale and my grandparents two of my grandparents fought in World War II and they did used to tell us like war stories as I was growing up.
Mm.
And it really felt like if you'd taken the vibes I had as a young kid listening to them and mixed in like magic and fairy tale bullshit, like that was really the vibe I got from this.
Um, I thought this was hilarious. Just like Rook is still so I don't know the word, abrasive towards Lucy around so much stuff. Like, I thought for a bit they almost were friendly with each other, but now it seems like it's gone back to when Rook was having to half pretend, half actually hate them to throw Mriska off the track. That's what it feels like again now.
Yeah, I think it was like she was very comfortable working with them all at the tea and stuff that we saw because it was
Mm,
like I think she was directly coordinating with Miss on it, whereas now I think it's all a bit messier than like I think the stories Rook tells here. I think Rook is just genuinely very scared and
mm.
nervous, and so
But
like I think
it
it's
yeah.
it's harder for her to focus on the way that this is Mrs. Practitioner, so it's all fine. She just does. She's injured. She's legitimately scared and just like a bit nervous. I think.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. There's lines from Rook like when Lucy calls out for Rook, Rook says, "I'm slightly injured, or you wouldn't have heard me," which is very like snarky. Or Lucy says, "Oh, do you want an ice cream bar?" And Rook's like, "In a million different ways, no," or something like that, right?
Yeah.
It's like, chill out, Rook. Come on.
I see. I sort of have like alternate explanation. Like that, or no, actually, I can't justify the slightly injured line. Although that read very fairy to me. That sounded like something Gilame would say.
Do you think that? So, does Rook ever explicitly confirm that she's
Oh
Rook?
gosh.
Maybe this Ogre Magi story is meant to suggest something to Lucy that will give Marcy an advantage.
Oh, here we go.
Because
Yeah. I mean,
Lucy
maybe.
says, "Oh, Rook," and then Rook says, "I'm slightly injured, or you wouldn't have heard me." Rook doesn't say, "Yes, it's me, Rook."
Yeah, and we do know Marissa has been injured since Daniel did that shit to her. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, uh, no, I'm not going to indulge this
Started as a shitpost is becoming real.
anymore. Yeah, no, I just because I think at one point I sort of suggested that Rook might have started off as a fairy and transformed herself into an Oni, and moments like this kind of make me think that that
Mm,
might still be true. Like,
mm,
just because that just it sounded like a quote from Gilame. But uh, yeah, no, I really love the unease to the conversation that you brought up because like I guess what I really like about it is like yeah, Rook is still very clearly sort of struggling with overcoming her prejudice against practitioners here. And it's fun because this is the side of the conversation that Lucy is not normally on. Like Lucy's not normally on the side of the conversation where she is the one who the people who have been harmed are struggling to look at her and see past that. Um
mm,
and I think she does a really good job of like continuously trying to make this a safe place for Rook to
mm,
express herself. Like Lucy is always the one who's sort of going like, oh, if you don't want to talk to me because I'm a practitioner, I understand. And
mm,
that sort of gives Rook the space to be like, well, you're Mrs. Practitioner, so it's fine.
mm.
But I almost get the impression if Lucy wasn't saying stuff like that, Rook may not have gotten to that same place where she was willing to tell her the stories.
Yeah.
Like it's like Lucy sort of Lucy's very openly, constantly addressing the fact I am a member of the class of practitioners, and most of them have been really shit specifically to you. And I think that like really helps Brooke actually be able to engage in a conversation.
Yeah, it's interesting. Um, yeah, you're right. You can definitely. In fact, I'm thinking back through it now, and definitely Rook has been more friendly with Lucy as compared to the other two. I think we almost immediately picked when Rook was being introduced that she and Lucy
Yeah,
would probably get along. So it's
but
nice
didn't
to have seen
Lucy
that prove true.
didn't Lucy pick that? I feel like in the email where Rook was introduced, Lucy was like, "I like her."
Yeah, that's true. Actually, you're right.
And yeah, I think like the reason it's like Rook and Lucy who get to have this convo, and so it's because yeah, like Lucy, I think is usually on the other side of this and is able to like
Mm,
basically hold her this end of the conversation in the way I guess she wishes other people would. Yeah,
yeah. Anyway, something that Rook mentions here, which is worth keeping an eye on or keeping in the back of our minds, is the witch hunters.
yeah,
Because they haven't been in the story for a while, but they're still around. So I'm kind of like, what that makes me think is, what Rook basically alludes to here of Marcy and Charles showing up at the worst possible moment, witch hunters, in tow or having tricked the witch hunters into doing something horrific that will get in the way. Like, I'm just imagining that's going to happen, and it's going to be really annoying to have to deal with.
I mean, yeah, you're right. It's funny. I have absolutely no fucking clue what the witch hunters are going to be doing for the next 24 hours of this story, right? Like it's worth bringing up. Like we talked about this in the Doof Discord today. Like the thing I'm loving about this story right now is there are just so many pieces in the air. I legitimately don't have a good picture for how the rest of this story is, or the rest of this day is going to play out at this point.
Mm.
Like obviously, John's about to start his big Carmine fight, and it's like, okay, so how much of the Kennedys going to be touching on that? Or are they only going to be doing their own shit around it? Like,
Mm.
yeah, the witch hunters, like, there's almost two big fights kind of going up, but they're going to have to interact to some degree, but also kind of not really. Yeah, it's wild. Like, and yeah, I have no idea where the witch, like, are the witch hunters going to be some Mariska users? Are they not? I don't fucking know anymore. We had a whole interlude introducing them, and I thought,
Yeah, I
like,
know. And then they've
and then
just
very
been
quickly,
sitting, waiting to,
yeah,
yeah,
we met
it's
them.
kind of worrying.
We met them, interacted with them sort of briefly, and then the Kenneteers almost just entered. Like, they started doing their dives into the Carmine stuff and being in the background more. And it's just like, you're out. We've got this other shoe of the witch hunters still yet to drop.
Yeah, yeah. um, it's something else Rook says when she's talking about, how many nights she's had like this and how none of them have been satisfying or felt like victories after long enough. She
Yeah,
mentions one because the victors became as vile as the people we'd been fighting, which is
a
feels
revolutionary tale as old as time.
yeah, it just kind of feels very interesting that it's on Rook's mind, given that she's helping practitioners here. Like,
Yeah,
I'm imagining that's weighing pretty heavily on her. Hopefully, this will be the first night of like this that will turn out all right in the end, eh, Rook?
yeah. 100 years from now, when she's sitting next to Twoosie, I'm trying to make a pun out of Lucy too. She'll
Yep,
be able to say
and
there
it
was one
really
time.
landed. We all knew that immediately. What you were saying.
Yeah, actually, I love that lead up into this bit though, where Rook's sort of like, oh, I've had, I don't know, maybe at least 20 nights of sort of this magnitude, and then Lucy's like, oh, how many turned out all right, and Rook just goes silent. And it's just like, okay, great.
Yeah, it's a little worrying that none of these have worked out well, right? I mean, maybe that implies Rook's high standards for things, but also is kind of worrying.
Yeah, it is. But maybe that's why maybe that's why she's a bit more willing to do stuff like try Mrs. tactic. I'm almost so interested. Like, we know that Rook has this other member of her was it sect? I can't remember the term she used for her, like,
Mm.
club of Oni. But we know there's like this other one out there who made the three Oni boys that we saw at the Blue Heron Institute. And it's interesting that Rook has much more aligned herself with Mrs. Plan for a trio of practitioners than the other Oni. It's a shame we never got to meet that other Oni and understand what the deal was there.
Yeah, yeah, true. Um, yeah, maybe we'll get a bit more Oni stuff before the story's over. I feel I don't know. I feel like it definitely felt for a while like it was something Wabo was really keen on exploring, especially as it ties into like breaking cycles of change, which is
Yeah.
part of what the story is all about. So I do think we'll get a bit more about it at some point.
Yeah, it's just because I feel like there was an aspect of the other three boys being created where it was like that Oni was trapped in a box and it was part of the deal to get out, but like I can't remember if we know where that Oni ended up, or yeah. Yeah.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah, I guess speaking of Oni related stuff, Lucy does sort of con Rook into giving her one story of one of these nights, and we get like what's essentially a big lore dump on like ogres and ogre magi. Um, and this is one of those things where, like, I really really love these lore dumps, and it's super fun to read. But there's never too much to say about them in this podcast because otherwise we're just reciting facts. But I do love that Rook's go-to spiel about a group of others are this class of other that sort of grows up in a very predictable way, but some of them can like overcome this
Mm,
nature and tear themselves out and make themselves anew.
mm,
It's like, well, that kind of sounds like Oni.
mm.
Like, of course, she's like, oh, ogre magi are great and powerful. Um, it's like a natural group of others that sort of do a similar-ish thing to what the Oni try to aspire to.
I like it. Yeah, I like that read.
They also just sound cool as hell. Like they're like big, really
Yeah,
tall people who get colored based on elements and can like. It sounds like they like shoot fire, like they firebend and shit. Sounds great.
yeah, I really did like this story. A very fun little, classic Whitebird just dropping a very enticing little short story
Yeah.
in the middle of this stuff. Yeah, it was wonderful. Um, but yeah, so we briefly cut back to Ray giving more advice to the Kenneteers about how organizing people is key, and then we jump to the Kenneteers organizing people, meeting with all the Kennet others, planning how to protect Ken and Jabba.
Yep. It's really worth pointing out. Zed, Bree, and Jessica are present in this meeting. Not necessarily as like members who get a vote, but like,
Mm,
do you remember? I think it was really early in Arc 9, when the
mm,
Kenneteers went to their first meeting after coming back from the Blue Heron Institute, and Avery like suggested, "Hey, what if we brought some of our friends from the Blue Heron in to help in
yeah,
town?"
yeah.
And everyone was like, "How
Heck
fucking dare
no,
you?"
no
Like,
way. Yeah.
it was like stupid and wild at the time. So it's like it's sort of really encouraging that here we are, like a month or two later, and Zed, Bree, and Jessica are now just like without even really it being commented on, naturally invited to at least attend and hear out this meeting. Like this is the real progress. I feel like you can make practitioners like the Kenneteers, but the fact that they are also gathering the people like Zed, Bree, and Jess, like other practitioners who aren't from dynasties or whatever, and getting them at the position where they're treated the same by the others and presumably are as good to the others as the Kenneteers. Like that's Mrs. Plan already working. It's already spreading a bit.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that Mrs. Plan has a lot of uh, a lot of strengths that it's clearly already starting to work with things like the Garricks. So, yeah, expanding the web of nice practitioners, and
Yeah.
it's good to see. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. It's nice for Avery that she, got to sort of prove herself right with these three. It's good for
Mm,
the others. It's good for these other trio of Blue Heron practitioners. It's great. Yeah.
yeah,
Wins all
it's good
round.
stuff. Yeah. I wanted to call out that there's this bit where Lucy's like kind of starting to freak out because she can feel that this is slipping through their fingers, that things are falling apart. And it's just like there's nothing that you can do. And that's like the most insidious thing about the Fate plots, right? Like
Mm.
it feels, in this chapter and next, Lucy feels like they're losing and she's trying to do things, but nothing's working to alleviate that feeling. Nothing feels like it's moving in the right direction.
No, and then not so much in these two chapters, but particularly last week. Then she has like Verona sitting on her shoulder, being like, "Let's just do a couple of bindings. Like, we can just cross a few lines, and then we might win, and it's fine." And it's like
Mm,
she doesn't want to cross that line, but also like, yes, sitting here with some of this stuff, it's just it'd drive you mad.
yeah, definitely.
Um, I love how they decide that they want Ken to call off the party, because they need all the innocents to stay inside, and he gets it done in like 10 seconds. And the Kenneteers are sort of like, "Oh, that's really powerful," and he kind of brushes it off, and it was like, "Oh, yeah, I was just ready." It's just like fucking Ken. Like this is just like we had the whole thing last week where the Kenneteers tried to argue with like the Ken, uh, and they were all like, "No, we're useless and we suck and we can't really do anything." And now you sort of see, well, actually, like they can, like he can pull shit like this so easily, and it's like that. It's just the metaphor for him as like a group of people just continues to frustrate and delight me because like that's such a perfect thing of like when all of society gets together and wants to do something, it happens in a fucking flash. But like when they're not in that mood, it's like, oh, I don't want to talk about politics.
Mm. Yeah, they were not super helpful.
Um, But yeah, so no, so Lucy outlines the plan here. We're going to protect Ken by giving him some bodyguards, and I think they reinforce his like special spot as well.
Yeah.
And then they've turned Jabber into a fucking that magician's trick where you put the ball under the cup and then you shuffle all the cups around.
Yep. Yep.
Uh,
The
they hit him in a
classic.
box and spread boxes all around town, and it's one of those things where I'm like, okay, this feels like that good stuff we were talking about with Fairy, right? Where you just try to close doors as much as you can, so they have to work for all the little holes they're trying to poke in your dam. But also, I can't help but feel that these plans aren't going to work, and it's a lot of resources and time if they don't. Like, because this is like the ethical versions of what they were talking about last chapter, right? With that argument about binding Ken and Jabba. This is like the can we do this in an ethical way version. And I'm just not convinced it's going to work, and I hate that because this is the good ethical version. I don't think it's going to work.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's the middle ground version that just feels a lot. I mean, like, I don't know, maybe it'll work, but it doesn't feel like it's fully effective, does it?
Yeah, like there's
It feels
the
like
jab.
something Marcy would be able to adapt to, not something that would stop her plans.
Yeah, exactly. Like the whole Jabba thing. I already mentioned. I think like Matthews stands as a vulnerability for the location of Jabba,
Mm.
which can be exploited. I actually would like to take this opportunity to drop a bold and specific prediction I want to lay out. Which like on our Discord, a user named Spinach mentioned the idea of like if Charles, because obviously next chapter we're going to learn that people can call in help for the Carmine contest.
Mm.
And they mentioned the idea of Charles calling in Kennett. And at first it was like, why would Ken go? Like, if Charles was like, oh, could I call Ken? And like, you presume Ken would be like, fuck off.
No way. Yeah.
um, eh, but like, I guess thinking on it more, I was thinking, we had that whole conversation last week about what kind of energy Jabba has inside of him. And the energy he's full with is energy that has been taken from the innocence of Canet. Like what he's full of is like power from innocence. So like if that's the angle you take with it, like you can sort of argue that it is just a huge pool of like power that relates to the innocent people of Canet.
Mm.
And so like we've talked so much about Charles drowning himself in power and getting consumed by that power, but probably the one type of power he can cover himself in and presumably get protection out of it would be like innocence.
Mm.
Almost as a way to temporarily combat the fact that he's forsworn. And also, if he's like, if he's juicing with energy from all the people of Kennet, that might give him some coup and claim over the innocence of Kennet, and thus actually maybe he can pull someone like Ken in.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I can see it. I don't know, like.
So I guess I'm less committed to the aspect of this, which is he will call Ken in to fight for him.
Mm.
I can see it. Like I think it'd be a really cool way to sort of undermine all the other fighters because they can't fight innocence.
Mm.
But I think the part that I'm really sort of hard on is I think this might be the angle for why Jabba would be important. Is
Yeah.
if Jabba's full of innocent juice, that just feels like something Marissa and or Charles can use to just pull some weird shit because innocents have so many special rules around them that like yeah, if there's a way for Charles to be protected from the harm he's meant to suffer or whatever, like it feels like getting covered in the power of the innocents would do it.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I can see it. I don't know. I mean, I think there's some merit to it conceptually, the concept of the power of innocence from Jabba being the tie that allows Charles or Marcy to leverage Ken, but it doesn't quite feel like it's there yet. Like I can see that being one step in the plan or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. So this won't be the entirety of the linchpin or anything, but like
Mm.
I just yeah. I guess it's just having had that whole conversation about what energy Jabba has in him and not really feeling like we had anything. I think
Mm.
this feels like the first good answer I've seen.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair enough. It at least starts to explain why Jabba is so necessary, I suppose.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, with that all sorted, all the protection of the key players, the Kentians bring up their final thought, which is the revelation, the accusation of Great Club Munchabunch. The revelation that he's working for Marcy, and he doesn't deny it. So Toad leads the other goblins in a ceremonial defeat, a ritualistic shaming ceremony, I guess.
Like this is it's so good. Like
Mm.
this is so I love everything about this because like what I sort of loved is very very quickly you start to realize oh this whole part exists because this needs to be Toad Swallow's win. Like Toad Swallow is trying to change what goblins are and we've just learned that the person who like is the biggest representation of what goblins are now is like evil, and so like as soon as it turns into Toadswallow versus Blunt, you're just like, oh fuck yes, like Toadswallow put this archaic bullshit to rest.
Mm.
Um, and so yeah, like watching Toadswallow one by one sort of get every other goblin onto his side instead of Blunt's is just so good.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. It's strong, isn't it? It's the Toadie's machinations coming to fruition, but in a way that is completely on the good team, you know?
Yeah,
It's
like
very
but
fun.
this feels to me like the end of like Toad's sort of arc in the story.
Mm.
Like because his market isn't going to happen in the context of this story. Like it's not the end of Toadswallow's story, but in the terms of just Pale, like this is he gets his win right here, and even though he's postponing his plans in general, it's like he scored his big ideological victory right here.
Mm.
Um, Although because it's goblins, of course, like it's all a mess. Like Gashwad doesn't actually take Toadswallow's side; he just sticks to his MO of not taking a side.
Mm.
Ramjam almost doesn't take Toadswallow's side because he's not paying attention, and he has to be reminded that he was bribed.
Yeah, they're pretty they kind of do slightly ruin the moment with their just goblin ways, don't they?
Yeah, like Snowdrop tries to help by telling Cherry to go, but of course Snowdrop says stay, so then Cherry gets confused. Um, it did sort of hamper the ideological victory of Toadstool a little bit that he's having to be like, "Hey, I bound you to an oath," and "Hey, I bribed you." I guess bribing and stuff just comes with negative connotations in my head, but yeah, I don't know. Like it's just such a nice moment to sort of see one by one all of these goblins realize that like Blunt Munch, like in standing for traditional goblin culture, has betrayed everything that it stands for because he worked for a fucking fairy.
Mm. Yeah. Oh, Blunt Munch. It's a classic mistake, really. Like it just is a bad decision by Blunt Munch, you know?
Yeah, and we'll talk about. I saved most of my thoughts for when he talks to John about it because it's great to hear
True.
from his perspective.
Yeah, I guess we'll get to it a bit later.
Um, but I wanted to call out this part where I'm just gonna read the whole thing. It's the part where Lucy turns Cherry Pop and Peckersnot on Blunt
Yep.
and really sort of helps Toadstool out in. So Lucy sort of says to Cherry Pop, "Tell Blunt Munch he's a fairy's bitch." And Cherry Pop turned, looking at Blunt Munch, and backed away a bit, like he was too scary when he was mad, even if he was trapped. You're a fairy's bitch, Cherry whispers. She backed away about 3 steps, nearly falling over as he growled. Again, Cherry looked up at Lucy, and a smile spread across her face. You're a flutter twits bitch, Blunt, Cherry said. You're a fairy's bitch. And I love this passage so much because
Yeah.
I love the little detail that Cherry's so nervous about doing it the first time. Like that's what I think if she'd like just immediately turned on him, it would have still been as funny in a way, but it would have been like the hesitation really sells how big a change this is, I guess. Like big equals better is such an entrenched thing in goblins that
Mm.
like
Mm.
Cherry Pop is so nervous to turn on Blunt because she just like inherently sees him as superior and just like yeah, just the hesitation leading up to her gaining the confidence really sells it as like a big important moment as well as being fucking hilarious.
Yes, it is a very good moment. Yeah, my favorite passage from this was Blunt talking about how small Toady is, and then Toadie's response being, "I'm bigger than you where it counts," which one is hilarious, but also is true. Just
It's
because
true,
we,
yeah.
the thing that sets Toadswallow apart is he's got a bigger heart and he's got a bigger brain than Blunt Munch. Like that's why he has evolved as a goblin and why we love him, but also penis, and it's just funny. It's
Toadstool's
such
had
a
a
perfect line.
Toadstool's had a lot of that stuff recently, like that really good like him intentionally playing with innuendo.
Yeah.
Like he had one last week where I think when Avery was like, why do you need to tell Miss stuff? And he's like, oh, I have, a pretty like, oh, he's like, I might be great, but even I have my refractory periods. Because he's talking about like his sleep,
Oh,
like just
Toady.
yeah, like he's a clever little shit. I love him.
Yeah.
Um, Also, just the moment where like I think once Cherry gets going, After we've had that moment where she whispers and then she gets confident and you really feel the moral victory, then she starts like singing "You're a Fairy's Bitch" off tune, and like beside her, Peckersnot is doing this fucking shitty dance where he's bopping up and down on one leg and pointing at Blunt, and like you can just picture it as this fucking like
Yeah.
just stupid clumsy performance by two absolute idiots. It
Yeah.
just this is
Uh,
why I love Goblins, because we could
I
have this super important moment that's also just so fucking funny.
I know you haven't watched Owl House, Elliot, but for those of our audience who have watched Owl House, there's a very minor kind of tertiary character in Owl House who is what I picture um, Peckersnot as, and it just makes scenes like this very visually hilarious. Picturing this character dancing and poking their fingers at Blunt, it's just wonderful.
Yeah, I love Goblins.
I mean, they're in the pilot, so if you just have to watch the first episode and you'll be caught up to the reference. You'll know them when you see them.
Okay, pause the recording.
Yeah.
Go do it now.
Trying to figure out if I know their name. They've only shown up in a few episodes. Oh, their name is Tiny Nose. Okay, there you go.
Well, that's like the opposite of
I know. I
Peckersnot.
mean, I'll be honest. It's an ironic name, Elliot.
Oh, okay. But yeah. So I guess, we get some more details on Blunt, and we'll talk more about it in the next chapter. But it is worth pointing out that exactly like Gashwad, his purpose has kind of already been fulfilled by the time they figured out he was involved, or by the time they did anything about it. Like, with Gashwad, it was sort of like, oh, he didn't sign up, and for a moment we're like, oh, so it didn't work. We have a chance, and then it turned out no, Edith already got what they needed from him. And then similarly, like here with Blunt, it's like, oh, Blunt, you can't be the distraction because we've already imprisoned you. It's like, no, he already let his dog meat
Yep, too
into
late.
town.
Yep.
And like, this is that fairy bullshit where we keep getting them and thinking, aha, now we've stopped it. And it's like, no, there were multiple layers to this, and what they really needed has still been met.
Yeah. Don't think even for a second Kennedy is the year ahead of Mariska.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Last thing from this section that I sort of had, and this was originally brought up that I saw by a bird on our Discord. There's something really sort of sus about Verona's phone situation here. And when I reread this the second time after reading Bird's comment, I think they're really onto something, because there's a lot of attention paid to Verona's phone before she even leaves Lucy's place. Like, Lucy keeps making comments like, don't worry, we're only a phone call away. And then we know that Brett has a history of taking Verona's phone or like threatening to not let her use it. So even though she sort of says, oh, yes, it's because I forgot my charger after Lucy says it, there's a part of me that's like, we know Verona's clever enough to have weaseled her way around that. And just, with what her dad's done in the past, I think it's likely that her dad did something with either her phone or her charger to take it away. And Verona is not wanting to tell them about it.
Yeah, I guess I could see it. Verona does explicitly say, I forgot my charger, in response to her not having her phone or something, which she could maybe imply, you could kind of say means, oh, I forgot it in the past, not, today. But it does feel like a lie if this is the case.
My other theory, like an alternate proposal, is Verona wasn't able to think of an excuse, and then when Lucy said, did you forget your charger, Verona was like, oh, I forgot I could use that as an excuse. Yes, I forgot my charger.
Interesting.
Which is definitely pushing it. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's just because of the history with Brat. I think that was what really sold me on this being something that I think is probably accurate. Is just, we know Brat has tried to control her through her phone in the past. So learning that he did so again wouldn't surprise me. Although,
yeah,
she has her phone in the John chapter, so I don't
know. Yeah. I mean, she has it back, definitely. So we'll see. We'll see next time we go in Verona's head what happened, I guess. So yeah, we get another quick flashback to Ray's advice. He advises the weakness that Marcy and Charles are going to exploit is what they know about them. Charles knew Ray and exploited him, and he pushed his buttons through that knowledge.
Yeah.
And so Marissa will probably do the same. And Lucy does not take this advice to heart, because we find out quickly that Lucy's mum is on a date with the handsome guy, which, for people who, maybe have not fully read all the past part of the story, probably doesn't sound that intimidating, but it actually is.
Yeah, so it is worth pointing out Ray's exact phrasing in this segment is he's like, they'll use personal connections, and you can't lock everything off. After all, like, we're only human. And I love that phrasing because it's the most human thing about Lucy that they've decided to attack right here, which is her mom. Like, it's explicitly her big human connection.
Her link to
that's gone off her.
humanity, yeah.
Yeah, like, this is such a great reveal. I think we've even joked about the handsome man being who she was going on a date with at one point. Like, and he's one of those perfect, like, he hadn't been mentioned in a while, and I'd sort of been like, gone from that, like, oh, he'll show up eventually, to just kind of forgetting he needed to come in soon. So it's just like the perfect reveal. I like the way Lucy sort of reveals it, where she sort of says, "Is he super attractive?" And you're just like, "Oh shit!"
Yeah, totally. Good stuff.
Especially because, again, like, it's just the dramatic irony is so fun with Jasmine, where she's like, "Well, Lucy, that's not really the most important thing," and it's like, no, actually, right now that is super important. Like, oh
yeah, good stuff. So yeah, what a reveal, huh? What a heart-wrenching reveal, and such a perfect lead-in from Ray's advice.
Yeah, this is such a great end to this sort of chapter, to just like leave you at 11 out of 10 panic. I'm super impressed in Lucy that she was able to stay out of it. Like, I don't know that I would have been able to in her situation, like, even knowing it's a trap. I think, not that I think this will be like what, lets her defeat Mariska or anything, but I think it is still a statement of like how far she's come, that she's not so easily emotionally manipulated. I think early story Lucy was quite prone to outbursts, and I think in the past, would have exploded if somebody came after her mum and gone straight for them. And I think the fact that she's able to trust like Miss and stuff to handle it, and not have to do it herself, not carry that weight on her shoulders directly, is like a huge piece of growth from her.
Yeah. It is, but it's also quite worrying, isn't it? Like,
Oh yeah,
yeah, you're right. Probably going to check it out would be part of Marcy's plan, but I don't want anything bad to happen to Jazz.
yeah.
Like, we get to the next chapter and it's been like 3 or 4 hours and Lucy hasn't heard anything yet, right?
Yeah.
So that's pretty rough.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought it would take that long if things were going even remotely well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, this is one of those things I kind of feel like either way, it's probably not going to affect Maricica's plan, because it's sort of one of those things where it didn't take Lucy off the board, but it's kind of taken Miss and whoever else is trying to deal with it off the board. And that still means that Maricica has advantages elsewhere, because people are dealing with the handsome man. But I think, like, yeah, sort of regardless of how it fits into Marcy's plans, it's just like, on her own, it's just impressive that Lucy is now in a position where she can let somebody else handle that problem. Even though it's tearing her apart, because it should be, because, like, holy shit, what a move.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the final reveal, because that wasn't a hype enough ending to leave it on. This is where we learn that the Carmine fight will be happening at the arena. And we get this great visual painted for us about how it's like lit up from the ground with blood, which is like, because you know how stadiums always emit light out the top at night because of all the lights pointing down, and it's all bouncing out, but it's all red, and then that's where the story began. It's so good. I fucking love this universe.
Yeah. Yeah, it's perfect. I mean, it's wild that nobody predicted it, because it's so absolutely perfect and obvious in hindsight.
I'd actually been really confused, and I think I messaged you about this last week. I made a bit of a discussion where I was like, I'm confused if the Carmine fight is happening in Kennet or in the Carmine domain. Like, I don't understand where it is, and I guess the confusion was because the answer was both.
Yep. It always is. So yeah, should we get into break 2, the heartbreak chapter?
Yeah, I don't know if you mentioned last week, but after you read break 1, you messaged me and said, "What if each break is some kind of prison break as all the people get out?"
Mm, mm.
And I wish you had been correct.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish I'd been correct too. It seems Wildbow is going for different thematic breaks. This one is a heartbreak. We join John as he packs up his life, trashing anything that he wants and keeping the rest for gifts.
Oh, I
Mm.
mean,
I mean, that's
uh,
the theme of this entire chapter, right? It's
yeah,
just
like
a sad affair.
like this is such a melancholic opening, and it's the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, it gets worse from here.
Um, like the fact that we open with John, like going through his life, and he's like finding things from back when Yulda was alive. He's finding things that are like so old they're falling apart, and sort of having these thoughts of like, I spent my
Mm,
whole life on the run, and I finally found my first ever home here. Like this is the one place I've ever been allowed to be comfortable, and I got comfortable. And he's systematically packing it all up to go throw his life away, and it's just like it sets the tones of like this is a goodbye chapter and makes you sad, and it's going back and like looking at my live read from this, I imagine my response would be, "Oh, buddy, you think you're sad now? Like, just fucking wait."
yeah, yeah, God. I'm impressed with myself for how long I managed to hold out before I started actively crying.
For
Because
me, it
this
was
chapter
the
is rough.
fucking tape player with the older
Oh,
like.
you didn't hold out at
No,
all.
I didn't. That's like by the end of the chapter, I was like, "Wow, I really went early on the tears." Like that was.
Yeah, it gets way yeah, I mean, we'll get to it.
And like, sorry, just to sort of frame that, like, because I don't want to be clear, I'm very emotionally repressed. Like, I don't cry that easily. So, like, I feel like that this is a testament to just how much
yeah.
this story's caught me up and how invested I am in it and how well it's
Mm,
working. That like, it was so easy.
mm,
I think we talked about it in All Packed Up One, but the first time I ever cried while reading something was the Packed epilogue.
mm.
And this is probably the second time.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. Um, so yeah, I think something that's worth just saying up the top here, kind of thematically, the vibe of this chapter is a goodbye to John, right?
Yeah,
I had kind of been holding out hope up until this chapter that John might win this Carmine contest, and while it would be a goodbye of sorts, he would still be around. I'm about 80% sure now that John is not going to survive this. Uh,
yeah,
this chapter
agreed.
thematically just feels like
A farewell tour.
a farewell to this character. Yeah. And that sucks. That sucks shit.
It really does, especially because like I was the same as you. Like as this started, and like when we first meet Lucy, like ran into Lucy, and I was like, she's not going to change his mind. Like this,
Mm,
ever since John shot Alexander in the head, we've been getting told by this story that it's not going to happen with these two,
mm,
and I knew that like intellectually, but just like making us go through this chapter and him having every opportunity, and we know he wants to and we want him to, even though like I knew it wasn't going to happen, there was still this little part of me that kept letting myself be like, oh, Wildbow's been playing me, it will
yeah.
happen, and then it just kept not happening. It's just like it's so perfect the way that it was like I knew it wasn't going to happen, and yet this chapter is just written in such a way that it's like rubbing that in your face and punishing you for wanting it to happen.
Mm.
It's so good.
Yeah. Um, yeah, rough chapter.
This first segment is like 2,000 of the 15,000 words or whatever, and it ends with like he finishes this tape and it just says silence followed the ending of the tape. Bye, he said to the silence before venturing out into the evening. And then that's like the end of the first segment, and it's just that's really just the clincher of the moment of, oh, this is gonna hurt.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so yeah, John begins his farewell tour, his final tour of duty, let's call it. He first stops with the goblins. Toady convinces John to share a warm beer with him.
Yeah, and God, I was even in tears at this moment with he has with Doglick, which is, I can't believe I was like crying at a Doglick
I want
moment.
to pull out the quote because I think it's hilarious. It's John is petting him and saying, "Hey, you're not a dog. No, you aren't. You're not a dog at all. You seem to think you've got everyone here fooled, but you don't. No, you don't." Just like classic cutesy dog talk.
Yeah,
That was
perfect dog
wonderful.
voice. Yeah. Yeah. I don't. Yeah, it just hurts. Like again, it's gonna that's gonna be the resounding theme of our summary of this chapter. Um, I love the gifts John brings to each of the goblins. Like, it really shows how close he is with them and how much he cares. Like, a broken, shitty, fancy watch is totally Toadswallow's vibe. Cherry Pop gets a second Infinity Stone, which is exactly her vibe. And Gashwad gets a stabbing knife, which is exactly his vibe. Like, he's known these guys for years and he gets them, and it sucks.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is worth pointing out, Toad Swallow also brings some pain for us. He says that he is postponing his market because he lost his sage. So Avery and Snowdrop have really fucked over his plans for the foreseeable future.
How dare they? But like, I thought it was interesting. Like, yes, there's some practicality to this, but it also didn't feel like that's actually the reason. Like, that's not the only reason he's doing it, because his sage is going away. I feel like I don't know. I feel like it's just Toady wanting the right Genetiers to be around when this all kicks off.
Yeah, he's like he might just not be. He needs to emotionally recover from Avery leaving before he's ready to look for a new sage. Like he doesn't. You don't want to fall into a shitty rebound sage, right? Like you want to give yourself time to get over the previous sage before you find someone new.
Yeah, yeah.
I know. Like John does make a bit of an argument for don't let perfection be the enemy of progress.
Yeah.
But I mean, like who's the other candidate at this point? Like Ram Jam, the guy who can't even pay attention enough to know when his bribe is relevant. Like,
yeah, clearly Snow is the best pick.
Yeah, I love Ram Jam, but I don't think he's sage material as he currently is.
Yeah, definitely. So before departing, John heads upstairs to also have a chat with his BFF, Blunt. A tense conversation.
Yeah, and I love this because I'd actually forgotten how close these two were. Like that was established very early on in the story. But it's been so long since it came up that I'd forgotten. And then yeah, like the second John was like, "I need to talk to Blunt," it was like, "Oh shit, yeah, that's right." These two were like best friends might be overselling it, but like I don't think there were many people John was much closer with. Same for Blunt, obviously. So it's like this great opportunity to sort of get into Blunt's head and also sort of have another big moment for John.
Yeah. Good double duty by by Warbo for sure.
Yeah. So I suppose this is where we should really talk about Blunt Munch's motivations in full, because basically, like even in the first chapter, it kind of jumps out to you how like there's something inherently ironic in him being like, I need to get away from this evil goblin queen who forces smaller goblins like me to be her brutes. But then also he betrayed everyone in this town who gave him a home while he was escaping that culture because he didn't like that they were trying to change it. It's like he very much gives off this vibe of like oh, I ran away from a version of goblin culture that was going to be bad to me, but now I'm here, and how dare you try to change goblin culture while it's working for me? And that's really the sort of vibe he doubles down on in this confrontation with John. Like it read to me like people I know who are somewhat right leaning, but like the people who would like identify as conservative, but they don't like Donald Trump. Like
it feels like the vibe of somebody who genuinely thinks that their life and possibly the lives of everybody was better, 30 years ago, whatever the nostalgia cycle is, which is, I can kind of understand that, because I can understand it from the perspective of, the media and news cycle makes you feel like the world is on fire literally all the time.
Well,
but
and I think I think we've talked about this before as well, but 30 years ago and before the internet and stuff, the only people who really had voices were the people who were running television stations and stuff. So it's like you didn't hear as much about the suffering of others because you were just getting like When in America and Australia's case, you're just getting the white people news, like
Yeah, it is a
so. Yeah,
privileged position to think
yeah,
that everyone was better off 30 years ago. Blunt, as a higher tier goblin, maybe was better off 30 years ago, but
yeah,
that's not that's not necessarily a good thing. And I think Blunt is trying to make a logical argument about logic that just doesn't apply to other people slash
yeah.
others.
Well, yeah, like he basically puts like the red cap queen like it's similar to arguments I've had with people in my life who identify as conservative but don't like Donald Trump, where it's like, oh no, that's just the bad form of
Yeah.
conservatism, but it was fine before Donald Trump. Like we just need to go back to George Bush, I guess.
Hmm.
Like that was when
Hmm.
things were good.
Yeah.
And it's like, was it though? Like, and then yeah, like so this way, like someone like Blunt feels trapped behind the red cap queen rising up and pressuring him in one way, but then also these lefties, Miss and Toad, are pressuring him in a different way. And it's like, why can't we all just do things how they were?
Mm.
And it's like, well, fucking look around. Like,
Yeah, how they were sucked for a lot of people,
yeah,
Blind.
yeah,
Yeah.
like, yeah. Gerhild's not the problem. I mean, she's the symptom. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
And I love this. Like, John sort of directly just calls it out as like, you sound like an old man. It's just like, again, that's Pale just sort of really thinning that line between metaphor and or subtext and text to make sure you're really getting it.
Mm. Yeah. Um, so yeah, next stop on the farewell tour is Gillamay, uh, who
Yes.
drops by for a quick chat with John.
Yeah, he's John's other BFF, and
Mm-hmm.
like again, this is just another person who I'm so glad we get to see their conversations with John, because this is the side to Guillermo he's never going to display in front of like the wider Kennet or the Kenneteers.
Yeah.
So like as much as we got extra insight into Blunt through here, it's like we just get to see the side of Guillermo he's been trying to hide from us here. Like I love how this chapter is John's farewell tour, and it does so much to hammer us like with John's pain, but
Yeah.
this extra stuff we get, like insights into Guillermo and Blunt, is such a great bonus.
Yeah. Yeah, these insights that the Kenneteers just aren't connected enough, I guess, aren't deeply connected enough to some of these others to get these insights.
Yeah, it's just different relationships. Like Guillermo is much more overtly a mentor to Lucy and Avery, and doesn't
Mm.
really have a relationship with Verona. Whereas like John, I really felt like these two were old friends in this
Yeah,
conversation.
yeah.
And as much as Guillermo can't help but mentor him a little bit, there's just I guess that respect and a different kind of respect and like a kinship. Like there's a similarity between the two of them that lets them connect in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I could see Guillermo doing this with a Lucy who's like in her mid-20s and is an adult.
Mm.
But like as she currently is as a teenager slash child, like it's just
Yeah, I
not.
mean, we explicitly see her as a child by the end of this story,
Um,
right? By the end of
yeah.
this chapter.
But yeah, like so Guillermo in this conversation, much more than any others, is just very upfront about like I mean, we've already compared what he's going through to a form of dementia before, but that comparison is pretty explicit in this conversation.
Yeah.
I think the really big revelation is that like off of that, he legitimately expresses doubt about defeating Marisica, which I don't believe is ever something he shared with everyone else. He always acts very confident. I think this is the first time we've really seen him sort of say, "Yeah, she's young and nimble, and I am not that nimble anymore. I'm worried I can't beat her." Like, I don't think he'd let himself say that to the Kenneteers.
Yeah, no, definitely not. Yeah, like I guess it's interesting because obviously we've been with the Kenneteers since the start of the story, and it's been a year and a bit IRL time, and however long it's been in the story, I guess it's a significant proportion of the Kenneteers' life. But Gillamay has been around for a long time, so
Yeah,
6 months of knowing the Kenneteers, while it may feel like a lot to us, is not a lot to somebody like Gil.
yeah, yeah. I just this scene puts you, it gets you worried about Gil almost as much as John too. Like,
Mm.
he's clearly got plans in the book, but he's really not as confident as he's been making out that they're going to work out. Which is like Gilmay's like the closest thing I feel like Kennett's had to an ace up its sleeve. Really, is like well, there's a fairy we think is working for us.
Mm.
Um, I think the other thing I wanted to pull out from this conversation as well is that John kind of gets coached by Guillerme in considering all of his like secondary goals if he does rise to the throne, like all this stuff about how he's still looking for things to believe in and stuff. And this brought to mind one of the things we talked about when we were like looking at the Carmine Beast at the start of this arc was this idea that the reason the Carmine Beast was eternally trapped and unhappy
Mm.
in the role was because she went in trapped and unhappy.
Mm.
And there's a sort of implication that however you sort of are, I mean, it's basically like falling to winter, right? It's like however you sort of are going into the role, you will kind of be stuck like that while you're the ruler.
Mm.
And so you can sort of see what Guillermo is trying to do here is give John more positives for his framing of how he is entering this. Because if it was just sacrificing himself to help like the people he'd wronged in the past, like he's gonna burn himself out and do dumb shit on the throne, right? Like so it's like it needs to be like more of a framing around I'm trying to find the good in the world and help it grow. Because that's what like that's a great frame of mind for the Carmine Beast or the Carmine Ruler to be in.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully, it will have an impact.
Yeah, well, hopefully it matters.
Yeah.
Hopefully John makes it to the point where it's relevant.
Yeah. True. Yeah. It's not a given that we will get to that point, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, last stop, last intended stop on the tour, I guess. John visits Zed and Bree and has a conversation with Bree, giving her some of Yolda's things.
Yeah, and this is a really nice contrast to those other two where it was like John really checked in with people who he had a lot of history with. This one it's like it's someone who he doesn't know at all, but the two of them have a very intense connection through for want of a better word, a mutual friend.
Yeah.
And it's like he's honoring Yolda as close as he can.
Yeah. Um, yeah. It's a nice moment, isn't it? I love that John tries to justify why he's giving these things to Bree by saying, like, oh, this might help with the bindings, which is probably true, but clearly not the reason that he's doing this.
Yeah.
And it's just, he's so sweet, and she is so sweet in response. Oh, it's lovely.
Yeah, has Brie ever been anything but just like the best?
Yeah, I know,
Like,
right? Can
um,
you remember when we first met Brie and she was in conflict with the Kenneteers?
yeah.
I can't even imagine anymore.
Even then, she was pretty cool. They're like helping her escape, and she was like pretty cool about it. Remember, she ate a bit of gasrod. Great times. Um, yeah. Brie continues to be great. I do love like you're right because there's like a few moments in this chapter, like to jump back a bit. When John was packing up his house, he has this moment of like, yeah, it's good karma for an other to like clean all evidence that they ever lived here, and
Mm,
like it makes logical sense that he goes around the house and cleans up all the guns that he's been hiding and forgetting about.
mm,
But also, like, he's kidding himself if he's pretending that that's the main reason he's doing it. Like, what he was doing was going on a trip down memory lane and, like, saying goodbye to his house and his home. And I think you're right that that's sort of what he's doing here as well. He's like, he's trying to act like and bring up the practical reasons to just sort of hide the fact that this is how he's going to say goodbye
mm.
to Yolda.
Yeah. Yeah. Gosh, what a chapter. What a sad chapter. But it's over now because John's finished all the stops on his farewell tour, which means all he has to do is go to the arena. And everything goes really smooth. Wait, Lucy's here. And yeah, it's rough. Lucy is not willing to say goodbye to John and begins a fight, a literal fight to keep him.
Yeah, Lucy doesn't really give you the impression that she's on board with John's plan here. Um, I I mean, I struggled not to just, like, pull out pretty much this entire conversation and then also both of the next ones because like, these scenes with Lucy doing all the various forms of begging and pleading, with John to not go is just so, like, emotionally charged and just, like, visceral and raw. I feel like I'm saying this every week now, but, like, holy shit, what a solid delivery on something that's, been getting set up for, a year at this point.
Yeah, yeah, it has been built up for a while, and It sucks, but here we are.
Yeah, and like we know what this means to Lucy. We've been in her head. Like we know how much this is just absolutely destroying her. We're also in John's head, and we can see it's destroying him, but he just can't. Like he has to do it, and it just it's so painful.
Yeah.
Like God, like like sorry, I was just thinking like Lucy goes through fucking everything to try and convince him. I'm always thinking like gotta go through that whole thing, the bargaining, acceptance, denial. What are the 5 stages of grief or
Of
whatever?
grief, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like she goes through all 5 of those in this chapter, or
Yeah.
she tries all of them.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, we'll talk about this a bit later as well, but like the part that's really painful about this to me is John is failing to do what he seems to have wanted to do his entire life ever since the interlude that we saw from him, which is breaking the cycle, right?
Yeah,
And Lucy calls it out, and grandfather calls it out, and John is doing that. John is, sorry, failing to do that here. He is playing into his sacrificial cycle, but we understand why he's doing it by the
yeah,
end, and I think by the end so does Lucy, and it feels like a very Lucy choice as well, but it just feels, I mean, it just feels so rough.
yeah. I mean that Lucy connection is the great irony of all this. That yeah, as you said, just the more you sort of dive into the way all those different threads interweave, the more it just hurts because it's all so
Yeah.
perfectly tragic.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
like if Lucy had a, you know, 80% chance at dying and 20% chance at surviving but becoming the Carmine, but it let her bring, you know, Verona and Avery back to life, would she do it?
yeah,
I kind of feel like she would.
yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, I just
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of a new way to say this hurts me in my soul.
Yeah, so Lucy has not yet come to terms with it though, and so sends off John for a 1v1 against Verona. Let's call it some light-hearted practice rounds for the Carmine contest.
Um, and what I love about this setup is like immediately as John got carted off to Verona, I was like, oh, this is perfect because we've just set up a 3 beat with Lucy. Like that was confrontation 1. He's been sent to Verona. He'll come back for confrontation 2 with Lucy, and then I was like, no, he's going to get sent to Avery. And then we're going to have our 3rd beat. Like we know this
Yeah.
this is a universe where the rule of 3
Yes.
exists. And I was just like, as it was almost like I just wanted to jump to the end of the chapter as soon as I got to this bit with Verona because I was like, "Oh, this is going to be a few thousand words just leading up to a final 3rd beat confrontation with Lucy." And I fucking love that this universe is a place where that just like, yeah, where you know the literary device and the text just are married like that. It's so good.
Yeah, it is. And it's perfect for the fact that we get to explore different kind of perspectives of the Kenneteers about this decision as well, which is wonderful. Um,
Yeah,
Verona is very actively, you know, she explicitly says like, "I'm gonna go all out because Lucy is my best friend." And given the fact that
yeah.
there's been some tension between them, that's kind of nice. um,
Yeah. So I want to pull out the line
yeah,
that really gets to him. The one where she's
yeah, yeah,
where she says, "John, hey, you already ended one kid's childhood. You really going to do the same thing to Lucy?" And he sort of pauses as he starts to process that, and she's like, "You got to do what you got to do. Stupid ideas of responsibility and crap. Doing what you did to Yolda with." And like John just stops and looks at her, and
yeah,
Verona's like, "Yeah, I fucking went there, and I'll go
yeah.
there again."
And my jaw dropped at that. Like that's so. I mean, Verona is going full out here. Like that's fucking insane.
But also, like, I think it's called for. Like when
Well, the
Verona,
funny thing to me about this is grandfather says effectively the exact same thing later on. So that kind of
yeah,
made me giggle a bit.
yeah, yeah, because I think it is a justified comparison. And like, yeah, what I loved about this is when Verona starts saying, "Oh, I'm going to annoy you," I was like, "Oh, that's Verona for she's not going to hold back." And it's like we spent a large chunk of this story constantly asking Verona to like hold back this side of her, and Verona kind of addresses that. She's like, "I usually don't go all out," like, but she's always been ready to take verbal put downs pretty far. Like I'm thinking of and this probably isn't even the best example. I don't know why it's the one that jumps into my head, but when at the Blue Heron Institute, they had like the thing where they were dueling students in the explodey thing out back, and
Mm.
Verona was a bit angry at Avery, so she like brought Pam up as a way to bind Avery to rub salt in the wound, and it's just like Verona is always sort of the person who is ready to verbally destroy someone if she needs to, and she kind of holds herself back from that when she's fighting them. And this was a situation where I was like, nah, fucking let him have it. He needs to hear this.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I still felt the pain when Verona said that.
I mean, yeah, but I loved it. I was like, yeah, like it's fair. I think John needs to justify the fact that he's doing it again. And yeah, as you said, grandfather brings up the same point because I think it's a valid comparison.
Mm.
Um, that said, though, like something you touched on earlier, we the fun in this isn't just that it sets up the three beat with Lucy, but we also kind of examine John's choice through the lens of each Kenneteer one at a time.
Yes. Yes.
And it's worth talking about like Verona's response to this because the plan that she does here, like the way that she holds him up and kind of like tries to change his mind is she traps him in a space, berates him emotionally, bringing up all of his previous mistakes. And then when he does try to leave, she begins using like her powers to physically control his movement by like putting fire down in front of him.
Mm.
And that's just like her dad's playbook, right? Like
The
own
practitioner version, yeah.
yeah, own the space, berate emotionally, bringing up mistakes, get physical and controlling when they fight back and try to leave.
Mm.
And I don't know, like maybe this is a slightly unfair comparison, but I was just like, it's worrying to me that that is immediately what Verona goes for here, because like, I mean, no doubt it works. Like, Brett is nothing if not effective at emotionally abusing people.
Mm.
But especially with our discussion question in mind, it was just like I was like, oh, it's not great that like when Verona really wants to get to someone, her instinct is to steal from her dad's playbook in a way.
Yeah, kind of worrying, definitely. Yeah, the fact that she spends the night with her dad and then is fully ready to go all out on the emotional battery front, and maybe it's a way of her kind of venting a bit. I don't know.
Yeah,
I mean, maybe that's unfair. We're not in her head, so we can't really make that call, I suppose. But
yeah,
yeah, I guess we'll see how Verona's doing next time we're in her head.
yeah, yeah. I can't wait to like her. Avery will be exciting too because she's
Mm,
obviously going to be doing a lot with her move, but like
yeah,
the fact that Verona spent that night with her dad, there's some stuff maybe going on with her phone. It's like her head is the one I really am excited to get back into and see what she's coping with.
yeah,
Because she does say her dad had a moment, but doesn't go into the details on it, which could mean fucking anything with her.
yeah. Yeah, who knows? Who knows what it would be? It could be anything. So yeah, John manages to overpower Verona, and she agrees to cease interfering in order to not be tied up and just left behind.
I want to call it this moment where so when she first suggests like the oath, she's like, "Oh, I could swear an oath, blah blah blah," and John points out that she didn't actually say the
Mm.
part about not interfering with him anymore, and she like smirks,
Oh,
and
it's
I was
classic Verona.
yeah, it's so good. Like, I was talking about being a bit worried about her and all this other stuff, but like, you forget that like this shit right here. This is when Verona's alive. Like this slightly fairyish aspect of Verona who just lives for i- getting into wild shit with others.
Yeah.
Like I think she knows that her and John aren't going to do anything terrible to each other long term. So this is just like, yeah, there's an aspect to her that's just really enjoying this, and that's uh so fun and enjoyable and a little bit terrifying.
Mm. Yeah. um, yeah, the fact that Verona is so in her element here, like, it made me think back to remember when Lucy was considering what weapons she should carry around, and we were kind of like slightly worried that she might be the Kenneteer that would escalate things too far. That feels so long ago, and now it's so clear to me that Verona's actually the one that's at risk of doing something seriously heinous.
Oh yeah, yeah, 100%. I mean, she is the one who's done the things most recently. Like I'm thinking of, when she got them the furs. Like that was a big win. Having the furs, well, I mean, I guess we still don't really know how big a win that was, but like at the time, it was a huge, big win, like massive swing by Verona, but also just like the circumstances under which she did it were very undermining towards the victory.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so it's worth pointing out while I'm sort of talking about some of this stuff with like Verona and controlling space and controlling movement, and how that might relate to her dad. It is worth pointing out the thing that really gets her to sign, that makes her admit she's lost and like swear this oath is it's basically when he's going to tie her to a tree, and she talks about like mozzies and Marisica and the dog meat, but I feel like we've seen Verona get tied up before, and she really doesn't like it. Like she hates
Mm,
being and I sort of share this. I hate having my movement limited, and so like,
mm,
yeah, like I think those all might have been excuses. I think like possibly short of actually physically harming her, I think the most scary thing John could have done to her is tried to tie her up to a tree.
mm. Well, she's someone who very much wants to keep moving. She doesn't want to have
Yeah,
to stop and process things, right? So I can imagine that a 30-minute timeout is one of her worst fears.
yeah. At least leave her with her hands free so she can like read a book or browse her phone.
Mm. Um, so yeah, John makes it back, but he still won't be swayed. So next up is Avery, who teleports him all the way to the town where people who abandon their friends go, Swanson.
um,
This is fucking hilarious, right? Like Avery and John both in Swanson, where the people who abandon their friends go. Like it's in such a sad chapter. It's a very silly joke, basically.
Yeah, like I sort of wrote that in the notes here, and it's like it's a little bit of a joke, but also like I think,
It must be intentional.
oh yeah, like this is the sort of story where it's like like Swanson makes sense practically because it's a place
Yes,
we know of from
it's a
Kennet that
nearby
is like,
town. Yeah.
yeah, it's far away but nearby enough that we can believe like Avery has the ability to travel there in half an hour, even though it takes 2 hours to drive. But like I also, yeah, this is a universe where I don't think it's an accident that like yeah, this girl who is currently juggling the fact that she thinks she's abandoning her friends immediately goes to the place where the friend who abandoned her moved to. Um and yeah,
Yeah.
dragging John along for the ride is, yeah, just great.
Yeah.
I was almost just like bring Olivia into this, just like we
Yeah,
could have a
that'll
full
be fun.
the full conference of people who ditched their
John,
friends.
before you go, I want your help getting revenge against someone who abandoned me.
Uh, but yeah, and I mean, like obviously, like Avery is very quick to fold
Mm,
here. Basically because she directly compares what John is doing to her situation. Like this is the way we sort of explore Avery and her confrontation with him. Like she barely fights him really. She kind of lets him go and just says, "Promise me you'll actually think about this," because
mm,
I guess she thinks she's abandoning them in some way, and she's like, "All you can really do is please just make doubly, triply sure that this is the right move."
mm.
Um, and yeah, I don't know. That's just such a perfectly Avery solution to this conflict, and like for where she is right now. Like she almost just wants the validation that you know, if you really think about it, it's still the right call.
Mm, yeah, yeah.
Also, she breaks those two tires and then drops a grand on replacing them, um, which
Yeah.
is very new money. You know,
Well, I think it's funny that John also doesn't know how much tires cost.
I mean, he was a stupid person to ask. Let's be
Yeah,
real. Like he
yeah,
doesn't.
fair.
How's he gonna know that? I mean, I had to get two tires for my car about a year ago, and like the Canadian dollar is about 1 to 1 with the Australian dollar. So unless there's some weird shit going on
So, how
over there,
much did your tires cost you, Elliot?
so yeah, I got two, and I think it was around $250.
Together?
Yeah, yeah, like 125 each. They weren't the best tires, I'll admit, but
Mm.
like,
But obviously, this car didn't look like it was
yeah,
especially high
yeah,
quality.
yeah. This
So,
car sounds like about as much of a piece of shit as my car is. Um, I mean, and there's the broken window too, but like again, like
yeah,
just it just read to me as like it's very funny that Avery got rich like 2 chapters ago, and now she's just like willingly breaking cars
Throwing
and
her
chucking
money away.
$1,000 in the
Yeah.
glove box.
Yeah. Yeah, hilarious.
Like she's gonna have to keep. If this is how she's gonna spend the money, she's gonna have to keep
Yeah,
making
she's
deals
gonna have
with
to
Garrus.
keep getting info out of Miss and Toadie. So yeah, John makes it back to Kennet for a third time, and this time it's Lucy who tries everything to stop him, but it doesn't work, and they say their goodbyes.
Oh, and this revelation that we have about 2/3 of the way through this conversation that so she hits him with an arena like when he first arrives,
Yeah.
and then it quickly dissolves after he basically says, "I won't fight you, so do what you need to do."
Yeah.
And then she reveals she didn't set up an arena for a fight. She set up a Battle of Wills arena,
Yeah.
and he won it. And basically, this whole conversation, she's been begging, even though she knew she'd already lost. Like she's just like fuck. This universe is so good. She can literally set up a Battle of Wills. Like
Yeah.
that's so amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's too much. This whole scene is too much. This is where to let the viewers in. This is where I finally broke down a bit. Lucy just having consistently been the strong one, and then just
Yeah.
like her having to watch John just slip through her fingers, and she loses another important father/brother figure in her life is just like so fucked.
Yeah, and it's I think like part of what sells it is just the gamut of emotions she goes through. Like we'll cut from like her being like softly just begging, like please
Yeah.
don't go, and then a few seconds later she'll be like yelling like "fuck you for doing this," and then like a few seconds later they're hugging, and she's like tearing at his shirt trying to stop him from going. It's just she goes through every possible emotion she can
Yeah, I
to
mean
express how much she doesn't want him to go.
she's desperate, right?
Yeah,
It's desperation, and it rips your heart out. It
yeah,
just
she
really
puts
does.
everything it is. I think the moment that hurts the most is, and this is the one where I started to let myself believe for a second. There's a moment where Lucy's like, "Just come, be a dog with me. Like we'll have a good life together. Don't
Mm,
think about it. Just like say yes." And he almost goes to not
it
think about it
almost
and say
works,
yes.
yeah.
And part of his not thinking about it is standing up straight, and that puts the weight of his pack, both you know literally and figuratively,
Mm,
into his field of vision, and that's what snaps him out of it. And it's just oh, it's so close.
yeah. Ah, yeah. Um, so yeah, John enters the arena, and we see all of his opponents. He walks past them all to take his rightful place on the throne, clarifies his deals with the judges, and starts defining the terms for the competition.
Yeah, and moving past the heartbreak of the last section, if I can, it is just really fun and badass the way John just immediately starts playing the coup and claim game on this throne. Like,
Yeah.
there's that bit of Alexander inside of him, really paying dividends. Like the fucking power of being the guy who walks in late, just goes and sits on the throne, and like immediately starts playing the like, okay, fine, like I'm here,
Yeah.
like you asked,
Yeah.
let's just do this, I guess. I'm busy. Like it's very un-John like, but definitely like he sells himself as the presumptive favorite
Yeah.
very effectively.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty funny. He's clearly, I mean, he talks about how he's been thinking about this a lot, right? So,
Yeah.
you do really feel that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just I guess after like, just having our hearts absolutely broken, I guess like the best way to mitigate that loss is for us to just come in here and just see John just fucking own this space, and it's like, well, at least he's doing well so far. And we
Mm.
get to feel what a badass move this is for a little bit at least.
Yep, for a slim moment.
We learned a bunch about some of the other candidates though as well. I've made a bit of a list here of just bits I wanted to talk about all the other candidates that we've met.
Mm.
First one, of course, my main man, the guy I hope wins, Breast Biter, the Chonk.
Mm-hmm.
Like Wobber's just really leaning into the stupid WWE wrestler vibes, and it's so
Yeah.
fun. Like this guy, the way he talks, he's like, breast bite of the chonk calls shenanigans. Like he talks like the boulder from Avatar.
It is perfect, isn't it?
Yeah, I fucking love this guy. I can't wait to see what dumb shit he's bringing to the table. We've also got Reed Musser, who he seems to be doing well. He's got bandages. Some are stained with blackness, other are stained with watercolor rainbows. That's very normal.
Mm.
I can't wait to find out what the fuck his father has done to him because I don't think he's completely human anymore.
Yeah.
He might have just speed run Verona's life goals.
Yeah. It's he seems in a real bad spot. Quite worrying stuff, isn't it?
Like, oh, it's so tragic. It's just his situation just sucks because he's here. He's like breathing heavily. He seems like he's trying, and that's the saddest thing is that like he's in a position where all he can really do is try to do what his dad wants him to in this fucking awful situation.
Yeah.
At the very least, he's probably going to get to summon a bunch of cool shit others that I'll be like, oh, they're cool, even though it sucks that they're on Musser's side and are probably enslaved by him.
Yeah.
We meet Cage Rattler, who so it sounds like it's this really badass skeleton, but then there's a guy inside this metal cage welded into the bones. That looks. I think John describes him as like having a real sweet look to him, and I was just like, well, I don't trust that. Not for a fucking second. I just got by freaking Squeak last week. I'm not doing this again.
Yeah, it's I found him pretty funny. Hey.
Well, especially, I mean, the other thing we know is we get told that he's like a boogeyman before, so we know he's from like the Abyss, and we haven't actually seen the Abyss, but we know that it was thought to be hell, and everyone we've met from there has fucking sucked.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, either my image of the Abyss is very unfair and has been tainted, which admittedly,
could be true.
Could be true. Like, this is practitioner opinions we're mostly hearing.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, just everything we know about the Abyss, I'm just like, I don't trust this sweet little guy stuck in an evil skeleton cage. He's fucking terrible.
Yeah, definitely feels rough, doesn't it? Feels like some dodgy stuff might be going on there.
Then we've got this giant face. And the giant face and the ear are very fun because giant face and ear face is what I've taken to call them.
Yep.
They're very fun because I feel like it's been a long time since we've just had no fucking clue what an other is, even after we've seen it. Like, I feel like usually once something has sort of properly appeared on screen, the Kenneteers either sort of know roughly what it is or somebody's pretty quick to tell them, like Miss or Rook or whoever. I feel like this is the first time in a long time, like probably since we got the reveal of what Miss was, that we've had others appear in multiple scenes that I'm like, I don't even know where to begin guessing what these guys are.
Yeah, what is the deal here?
Like a giant ear face that bleeds blood. Sure. Yeah. The giant face also particularly jumps out because like the giant face raises a lot of questions about what it's doing here. Like it didn't even know there were 4 judges. It doesn't even seem to know they're fighting for a judge position.
Yeah, totally. Doesn't seem to have a solid grasp of what's going on.
Yeah, like feels like a dude who walked into the wrong classroom. Like, and then they're like, "Oh, we have to fight together." And the giant face is like, "Can we fight alone?" And like, it's just everything that comes out of this thing's giant mouth. I'm like, "What is your fucking deal?
What are you on about?
Like, why are you here?"
Yeah.
If there's any candidate who turns out to have been some like tricksy plant by some group we didn't yet realize had a candidate, like it's got to be Giant Face because
Giant Face definitely feels
like a fall guy. Like he's just been thrown into. I don't even know what he could be trying to achieve.
Yeah.
But like, yeah. There's a story as to how the fuck Giant Face ended up here.
I mean, Ear Face also seems very strange. Why are there 2 separate face-based others in this showdown?
I mean, yeah, but like Earface is like sitting in the corner, like bleeding everywhere, which is like menacing enough that I kind of feel like they know what they're up to. Like, you don't confusedly sit in the corner and bleed blood out of your Earface.
Sure.
So I feel like Earface at least knows what they're doing here, even though I don't know what they're doing here. Giant Face, just like, yeah, the fact that they didn't even know this was a fight for the judge position. I'm like,
what are you doing here? Yeah.
So yeah, I'm very excited to find out what their deal is. Like, I have to believe we'll get at least one other look at this fight as it's ongoing. Because I assume like it's still presumably going to be. I feel like the Kennedys and John have both sort of implied that it's still going to be what we saw with the Carmine thing, where it's like a series of challenges. So John will have to beat everyone in 1-on-1.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like a knockout tournament or anything. Which that would be more efficient.
Yeah, John's gonna have to fight his way through every single one of these, and like, I don't know. Then that's not counting whatever Marisica / Charles have up their sleeves. It just feels unwinnable, doesn't it? Like, John feels like he's gonna die. Sorry, folks, but if you all know that film, John dies at the end. That's an adaptation of this story.
Oh, that's why Wildberg called him John. Yeah. So I don't know. It's gonna be really interesting to see exactly sort of how the combat plays out, because I feel like we've been sort of hinted that we should assume it's going to be the same. Yeah, John has to take them all out one by one format, but maybe it'll be different.
Yeah,
like my first, before I remembered that, I initially thought it was just like a fucking like gladiator mosh pit style, like everyone starts in the arena. It's like last man standing sort of thing.
Yeah,
which made the reveal that John wanted to bring in groups hilarious to me, because it was like, oh, you just turn this on, like
send them in to die instead.
Oh, just like rather than like 10 people fighting in a pit, John was like, oh no, let's make it like 500. Why the fuck not?
Yeah,
like,
I mean, it's not the worst idea. Hey,
I guess it seems like turning a fight into a war, but like it makes a lot more sense when you remember that the last one worked as like a series of one-on-ones.
Yeah. So yeah, John reveals his whole deal. He wants to bring the dog bound, what is it? The dog pack. That's it. Back to life.
It's written right there.
Sorry,
like,
yeah,
I don't
the
know,
pack.
You forgot the word.
He wants to bring his pack back to life, and reveals. He kind of quickly does so and catches them up on what has been going on, including the fact that he has just recently broken Lucy's heart.
And like obviously the revelations about Lucy and the others' opinions on that like dampen this moment a bit, but it is like worth saying that after what we and John had to go through to get to this moment, it is so satisfying getting to watch him just throw each tag on the ground, say their name, and have them come back.
Yeah, there's definitely a nice moment to it. Because it's it really feels like John has been building up to this in his life, right? So the fact that we get to see it pay off is pretty nice.
I mean, this is the whole this is what he's gone through all of this for, is like this moment where he got the deal made, so even if he dies, they go free, and so that's just like he throws about 10 of them down in a row. And I feel like in any other situation, I would have started skimming after about 2 or 3 of them, because I'm like, I get it, more. But it was like, I felt like I'd gone through such a journey to get here that I was like excitedly reading what each one was.
Yeah, he's earned it. He really has.
We fucking earned this.
Yeah.
This is the moment where I was like, I think this almost might have been worth it, John. He does say though that there are a bunch of tags that are still bound.
Yeah.
Like Angel says, oh, is this all? And he's like, oh yeah, some of them are still bound. And I'm just, do you know why those ones are still bound?
What's the story there? No, I do not have any idea.
Are those the ones who were bound later? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, or were bound something separately. I'm not sure.
Yeah. But yeah, I think the thing that really sort of sells this as a great moment as well is not just like watching him bring them back, but like the way the group sort of immediately just finds a rhythm again, and like, they're all sort of bumping into each other and just like suiting up. And you can just feel like John just feels at home again and with like his peers in a way that he's been longing for this entire story. And there's even the moment where like they ask where Yolda is, and he says, he basically says, I shot her. And Grandfather like looks at him, and John just like meets his eyes and stares back, and then Grandfather just sort of accepts it. And it's like, I'm a real sucker for that trope of like people who've known each other for a long time and fought together, like that innate trust you get. Like the fact that John can look grandfather in the eyes about this is basically all grandfather needs to know that it was the right call.
Mm.
And there's just like, it's a big thing in The Expanse as well, and I just never get sick of it in stories, and I think it's like, this is what John has been missing since everyone else died and since he killed Yolda, is the people in his life who are with him on this level.
Yeah, it's you're right. He having John having some actual strong allies is it's just quite kind of nice. Allies that
Yeah.
just kind of seem to get him and are kind of undeniably on Team John.
Well, I mean, yeah, he needed the rest of his pack, like, I mean, it's like, that's just what it is. He's been a dog who hasn't
Yeah,
had, yeah, the
yeah,
rest of his family with him, and he gets them back,
yeah.
and then, that moment though with grandfather sort of innately trusting how he killed Yolda, through that though, I
Mm.
I think, like, works doubly well as well, because you don't just get that great moment of, like, seeing how on the same page and loyal these guys are, but then when grandfather, sees Lucy and finds out a bit what John did to him, as you've already talked about, grandfather just immediately calls bullshit. He's
Calls
like,
him out on it. Yeah, it's wonderful.
like, grandfather's just immediately like, John, the whole fucking point of coming here was that we wouldn't keep doing dumb self-sacrificing shit,
Yeah.
and uh you've come and self-sacrificed your shit to save all of us, you fucking dumbass. Like,
Yeah, like I love that. I love that. Something I was slightly worried about, I suppose, was the idea that John resummoning these his friends here might kind of shape them into versions of these people that are like on board with what John is doing. And the
yeah.
fact that grandfather immediately calls John out on this was just very reassuring to me of like, yeah, this is cool. These are people who these aren't just like mindless John drones. They are actually these people that John cares about, and that's kind of nice. These being able to do that.
Yeah, I think the other really fun thing is, like, in 10.A,
Mm,
John was talking about how he wanted to escape this cycle of, like, violence and self-sacrifice he was in.
mm,
And I think since 10.A, we've constantly been coming to this podcast and being like, I don't understand how the Carmine thing helps him do that.
yeah.
Um, and grandfather kind of gives us the answer here, which is it fucking doesn't. Like,
No, it doesn't.
he's an
He
idiot.
he's continuing to play into the cycle.
Yeah. He like admittedly is like doing a bit of a like one last job style version of it, where it's like
Yeah.
he will either get this, throne job, which he sells here as something that I think the dog pack would be quite good at,
Mm,
and actually find some level of happiness with. Like, they wouldn't be as
mm.
miserable as the Carmine was. The Carmine boss
No,
was.
there's yeah, you do get the sense that it maybe could work out
Yeah,
theoretically.
especially because he's got the group again.
Yeah.
Um, like, the worst case scenario for John is that he wins. Is the only one left. But yeah, like, yeah, he's like, he's sort of trying to get out of it by either getting this job or dying and freeing the others, but in a very self-sacrificial way that I was like, oh, this explains why I could never understand how doing this got him out of the cycle. It's because grandfather tells us it doesn't. He's an
No, it
idiot.
doesn't. He's continuing to play into the cycle. Yeah.
I mean, the one good thing that comes out of it is, now that grandfather and the other, like, members of the pack know about Lucy, I can see an epilogue where even after John dies, the rest of them go and, like, make Lucy being the new Yolda, like, official in an epilogue,
Mm, mm.
and that will be like the bittersweet, like, it's something sort of thing of like, at least Lucy will get to work with all of these other guys that John sacrificed himself for.
Yeah, I mean, it's not much of a, you know,
Well,
of
it's not
a,
ideal, but
yeah. I guess it's something. I guess you're right. It is technically something.
I mean, I would prefer that to them all just running off to be a ragtag team of, justice people.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
It is worth calling out as well. I think we already did briefly mention it, but grandfather calls Lucy a little girl, and on instinct, John corrects him and says teenager, uh,
mm.
which just really shows how close and on the same page they are, because that's her fucking catchphrase. Um,
But then he recorrects himself.
Oh, yeah, and he does say that she's a child because of just yeah, I mean, I don't it's a I think it's a fair thing, like, I wouldn't say it to Lucy's face, she doesn't need that, but, like, I guess considering how much he shattered her, I mean, that's the thing. I think when you get your heart broken like that, it leaves you vulnerable enough that, yeah, it probably is a
Yeah.
fair
Yeah.
distinction to make here.
Yeah.
So the last thing sort of here, John almost gave me the impression with the way he phrases a thought here that his plan of turning this into a competition where you could call allies was something he came up with on the drive from Swanson,
Mm.
which I'm not fully committed to that interpretation, but like he at the very least was thinking about who Charles could call in as an ally. And I'm still kind of riding the idea that maybe Ken is an option, but
Mm.
uh, yeah, I don't know. It's just interesting because yeah, the way he phrases his thought for a second, I was like, oh, is he implying that this is literally a plan here we just came up with? Because
Hmm.
it feels like one Marisica will be fine adapting to. It doesn't feel like a huge unpredictable move. I mean,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
very interesting to me. Yeah, I don't know, like the plan of bringing in allies. Like as an example, the Ondvarg wolf is one of the one of the champions here, right? And even more so is seemingly explicitly the one that that was brought in by Marcy
yeah,
so
and it's
far
got
of the ones we
and,
know.
yeah, and there's the whole fucking Jungle Book squad over there. Like,
Exactly, right? Like that seems to the Onvarg wolf to me feels like it's picked intentionally for this
yeah,
circumstance almost. Like yeah, I don't so I just find it interesting. Like this doesn't feel like it definitely feels like a good way for the playing field to be a bit more leveled, but doesn't feel like it's enough to be you know, enough basically.
no, yeah, exactly. Like this absolutely is the best case scenario for John, but like, yeah, just the way he phrased that one thought made me think that he'd just come up with this and maybe thought that it was something Marissa and Charles may not have expected, and I was like, that seems very
Yeah,
optimistic.
exactly right. It did make me think, though. The thing that was funny to me about this was uh, Charles and Marcy are expecting to enter the contest at a very pivotal moment, right? Like I expect them to show up at the very end, which means John's the optimal strategy to fuck them up for John here might just be to lose as quickly as possible, so the tournament finishes quickly and they arrive too late. Because I think it was the Sable who just kept mentioning like, if you're too late, that's it. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
so I just had the thought of it would be absolutely hilarious if the way that John ends up winning this is by just basically taking a dive as quickly as possible.
Oh, I mean, Lucy would never forgive him. Lucy would like bring him back to life just so she could kill him.
Yeah,
Um,
but it
but yeah,
would
that's
be
funny. You pick someone
funny.
else. You pick someone else you want to win. Right? John just decides, it's going to be breast biter, and then just like
Yeah,
kills everyone
throws.
else
Yeah.
quickly. Or, yeah, throws it. Yeah, I mean, yeah, like you're not wrong. That would probably throw things off.
What a strategy, am I right?
Yeah, like that is a move I would not have seen coming. For him to just lose it immediately. Um, what a terribly beautiful idea.
But yeah, so that's where these chapters leave us.
Yeah, where do you think we're going next?
I mean,
Like,
because the other thing is, we're not gonna we theoretically aren't gonna see this contest. I mean, we've got to get some interludes, surely, right?
yeah, yeah. Well, this is what we were saying before. Like, there's two big fights going on in this finale that will maybe interact, but it's super unclear exactly how much. Like,
Yeah,
we know Marissa and Charles are going to try to gate crash this party, but they maybe have to get through the rest of Can at first, or like, yeah,
yeah.
like fuck knows.
So are we gonna? Yeah, I actually have no idea. Like, how are we gonna get? Because there's a possibility that the next time we see it is just Charles and Marcy enter the contest after they've beaten their way through the Kenneteers or whatever, and we see John like battered and bloody, and Reed is dead, and Onvarg
Yeah,
Wolf is dead, and all that stuff. But that just seems crazy that we like. Surely we would
that we'd
see
miss
it.
it. Yeah,
Yeah. So I don't know. I actually have
yeah.
no idea how it's going to work.
I'm not gonna lie. When I opened this like chapter for my
Mm.
live read, and so it was a 15,000 word John chapter, I was like, oh well, we're gonna get to see the start of the fight, that's for sure.
No,
And obviously
wrong.
that was totally wrong, and I'm kind of glad I was wrong because like this chapter dealt with way more important stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, then when I finished it, there was a part of me that was like, when the fuck are we gonna get to see any of this fight?
Yeah. Right.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I guess we'll see. Like my guess is that I'm still kind of my guess after reading 1310 was we were going to get like an interlude from somebody trying to protect Jasmine, or in a fucking perfect world, we could get a Jasmine
A
interlude.
Jasmine interlude. Yeah.
As she breaks up with the handsome man.
Well,
I
I don't know if they're even dating yet. They're going on a date.
I think this is their like second or third date.
Mm.
She's been on other dates with him for sure.
Mm.
Anyway, yeah, so I'm still hoping we'll get that soon-ish. But yeah, you're right. Like I don't really see many other perspectives I feel like we're actually going to get in inside the arena itself.
Yeah. We'll
So I mean, at this point, like I've totally lost track. Pale up until now has been relative to some of the other Wildbow works, kind of ridiculously consistent in the length of arcs. Like some of them have gone a little bit long, but like overall in general, it's been quite easy for us to say, okay, the arc's probably going to end within the next fortnight.
Yeah.
This is the first arc in a long time where I'm like,
is this the
do we have two
final
more?
arc? Who knows?
Do we have 2 more chapters in this arc, or like 7? Is this just a double length arc suddenly? Like I don't know.
Yeah. What was this? Was 1310? Is that right?
So, yeah, and the 2 breaks, which is 12.
Yeah.
Which is not like we've had arcs that long. I don't think this is yet the longest arc in word or chapter count. Actually, sorry, no. Looking at it, it is actually the longest by word count, but not yet by chapter count. But yeah, like it feels like we're probably still a few weeks away from it ending. Whereas usually by 12 chapters into an arc, I'm like, oh, okay, this is rounding out.
Yeah. Yep. It's just impossible to know, isn't it? It feels impossible to judge.
Which is very fun. I mean, that's my vibe with this whole finale is like, I love that even with Snowdrop's tiny fan fucking pulling this story apart for months, like, us sort of reading the chapters twice and all that, I'm still coming into this finale and I'm like, it's either got somewhere between 5 and 50 chapters left, and I don't know what those chapters are going to look like.
Exactly.
I love that all these people like putting a fine tooth comb on it. I still have no fucking clue what's about to happen. Like that's what you want.
Yeah. It just feels so impossible to know. So yeah, I guess that's where the chapters end. Should we get into some pale predictions, Elliot?
Yeah, let's do it.
So yes,
sorry.
Please.
You go.
Well, I was just going to say, these are predictions that are left in the Pale Predictor form in the show notes down below. So if you want to do a prediction, you know where to find them.
Yep. Feels like a long time ago because this is another long fucking episode. But remember, we plugged it at the start. Put your Pale predictions in there because we'll be going over them in the stream.
Yeah.
I do have to admit, in terms of like pulling out the worst or funniest predictions, ones made after this episode comes out probably will lose points for coming out after we explicitly told you guys that we were going to be doing crazy and stupid ones. But I guess see how you feel. Maybe you've got a particularly good one that'll still win.
Yeah.
So I'll pull out mine, which was from Mark Confident, who basically has just predicted that the reason that this alabaster in this region is so long-lived compared to most alabasters is because they mostly shirk on spending power and actually protecting the innocent. They avoid doing things their role demands that usually cause alabasters to burn out. And I really like this idea that like we've often questioned the mystery of why this alabaster is so long-lived, and the idea of the answer being it's weirdly powerful because it's really shit at its job is a pretty fun one.
Yeah. I like that. I'm interested. I guess how would that ever be confirmed in this story? Is there a way that it can be that this can end up being true?
I honestly, I think the chances that we would get a confirmation either way on this in Pale is pretty unlikely. It could happen. I mostly brought it just because I thought it was a really fun thought. Like, even if it doesn't get confirmed or deconfirmed, I really liked considering the idea that the reason this innocence embodiment is so long lived relative to the others is because it's a shit one, so it doesn't have to cop as much. Like, I really like that.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. That is quite a fun idea. So for my prediction, I've put out one from. Wait, who's this? Elliot? Huh? This was yours, right? I saw it had your name on it. I'm just assuming it's yours.
Yeah, this. Oh, now everyone's gonna think this shit's a rort. I didn't sign up for this.
I just thought it was a fun. Well, you put the prediction in, mate. What do you want?
Yeah, because the way the spreadsheet works is it doesn't get set up right unless you have at least one prediction in the category. So when I made the new "Who will sit on the throne" category, like if you go to all the categories, I'm the first prediction because I've chucked something half decent into all of them because we need at least one.
That explains it. But I still did actually kind of like this prediction. So.
Oh, this is my genuine theory. It's just I wasn't trying to submit it as like an actual contender or anything.
So here's Elliot's wonderful prediction that he begged me to pull out. Guilherme is a kind of seasoned warrior who's grown semi-compassionate now that we're nearing the end of the story. And Elliot thinks that a wintered Guilherme might be the best person suited to sit on the seat. Somebody who's, used to or revels in a kind of mundane drudgery of their position, I suppose. I just thought that was a very fun, that's such a fun idea. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, I think like part of this was I think it was in Mile End we read that it's actually fairly common for Fairy to take the I was going to say Alabaster position, but Aurum feels more their speed. There was one position that they said Fairy can often take it. And I guess just the idea that like the way Winter has been described doesn't feel all that different to the horrors that the Carmine Beast went through, like that kind of eternity of being stuck in a rut. And Guilherme is obviously very associated with violence and fighting. And he's apparently done a bunch of terrible shit in his past, but right now he seems pretty chill. So,
yep,
you could do worse. I think most of the candidates currently in the fight would be worse.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure.
So yeah, that is my guess for who will. I think John will die, and then Charles will go through a bunch of shit, and I think right at the end, Guilherme will be the one who's there when everything else is said and done, and that'll have turned out to be part of Marisica's plan too.
Yeah, I like it.
The Marisica part is the bold, specific prediction thing. I'm trying to keep up with Malia here.
I do very much like it as a theory.
But yeah, speaking of who will sit on the throne, so obviously that is the new category on Pale Predictor. There is now only that category and miscellaneous because there's not too many things left to predict.
What about what will happen with the BHI, Elliot? I feel like that category still had some legs left in it.
That was like, I knew we'd been kind of neglecting Pale Predictor, but when I actually went to remove what the active categories were and saw that like how will the Alexander and Bristow situation get resolved was still there. I was like, oh Jesus Christ, like we dropped the ball on this. But yes, it's all cleaned up now. And you could vote it or put your predictions down in those two categories. But those of you on the Discord and Reddit will probably have seen that we've also been running a poll on who you think will win the Carmine Throne at the end.
Yeah.
So it's time for a bit of a segment that we haven't done since Medium D was cancelled. It's time for Elliot crunches numbers on a podcast. Everyone's favorite form of audio enjoyment is discussion of statistics in podcasts.
Yeah, of course.
So yeah, of all the people who voted sort of right before we started recording this episode, there's actually a bunch of fun stuff to talk about. John has about 35% of the vote, so just over a third of people think John is going to win it. Although we got a bunch of comments and even some people who like did write in where they said John but not because I think he's going to win, just because I'm not ready for if he loses.
Yeah, I can get behind that for sure.
Yeah, so there almost needs to be a second poll of just the people who answered John, where it's like, is this your genuine theory, or are you just not coping with the
Yeah.
idea that he's going to die?
Yeah. Which is fair.
Yeah. So, John got 35% of the vote, but there's probably an argument to be made that it's more like 20, and then we had 20% of people saying, I don't know, but please, John.
Yeah.
So the second most popular theory, coming in at roughly 25% of votes. So 1 in 4 people think the position will either be left empty or like gotten rid of. I lumped those two together, so it's hard to know again exactly where people think it'll sit between those two. But basically about a quarter of people think that things won't be the same.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Coming behind that, so the third most popular answer was Miss, which I know from when we had them on our show and from before that. Megafire has been a devout spreader of that theory for a long time. So congrats to Mega. You seem to be doing your job because it's the third most popular theory.
Yep.
Charles is just behind her though. There was less than 1% difference in the end.
Interesting.
So yeah, Charles coming right up behind Miss as a favorite. And then the last person in terms of the options I put in the poll that's worth mentioning is Ondvarg the wolf was the only person to get 0 votes.
Huh.
There's at least one cage rattler stand out there. There's at least
but
one
nobody
ear
believes
thing.
in Ondvarg.
Yep.
Poor
There's people who
Ondvarg.
believe in Earface, Big Face. No one who
Wow.
believes in Ondvarg.
Wow.
So that was fun. But yeah, so to get into the write-ins, because we had a lot of write-in candidates.
Okay.
We got 4 people who submitted the trio, like as a group.
Oh, so collectively they will all sit on the throne together.
Yeah, and then we had 4 people say just Verona, 4 people say just Lucy, and only 1 person write in just Avery. So congratulations congratulations to Avery.
Little Faith. Or I guess Big Faith, yeah, true.
It was interesting actually, because the original reason I included this statistic is when I did this morning, it was actually 1 for Avery, 1 for Lucy, 4 for Verona, and 2 for the trio.
Yeah.
So originally, Verona was a heavy favorite, which I brought into this because I was going to apologize to you as someone who keeps shutting down your idea that Verona might take the Furs. But then, between the first pass and the second pass I did just before we started recording, the Lucy stands, or Lucy haters, I guess, depending on your framing, came in and did her and the trio as a whole a lot of service.
Yeah, funny that people are on the. I get it. I mean, like, it's the Verona is at risk of doing something
crazy.
Yeah.
And then like Lucy, I think has always thematically felt the most appropriate for the position. She's the one who's been associated with violence from the start. Another write-in fun fact. So you and I both did write-in candidates.
Yep.
I submitted Guillermet and you submitted the Forest Ribbon Trail Wolf.
Yep.
We both had exactly one other person do the same thing. So both of those characters got 2 votes.
Who else was on the
Didn't
OG
put a name.
Wolf? Oh, okay. Dang.
Speaking of people who I'm mad at for not putting their name, because putting your name in was optional.
Yeah.
And I'm one person submitted Alpiana.
That's pretty wild. I like it.
Yeah, which is like, I was devastated when I saw that listed and didn't see a name next to it, because I was like,
yeah, you want to hear the working out on that one, don't you?
Yeah, like that is such a left field play that I want to know what their logic was. I guess there's a chance that they were joking. It's an internet poll.
Yeah, true. Did we get any Bodie McBoatface write-ins?
We did get a write-in for Cherry Pop, which I do assume was a joke. I mean, there's every chance. Yeah, well, that could be a person who doesn't know what April Fool's is.
Yeah,
thinks 1412 is legit.
Hey, it could be. We don't know. It's starting to look more and more likely.
Well, yeah, she's got 2 Infinity Stones.
Yeah.
I mean, the Alpiana one, like, Cherry Pop feels like a joke submission to me, whereas Alpiana is legitimately the one where I'm sitting here and I'm like, this person could be serious.
Yeah.
And I want to know what. So if you're listening, person who submitted Alpiana genuinely, or if you're listening to this and you think Alpiana makes sense, please throw your reasoning in our discussion thread because I don't really see it, and I'd love to hear the thoughts behind it.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for giving us the data breakdown. It's fun stuff.
Yeah. So we'll leave that open for the next week, and if there's any interesting changes, I'll report on them next week. But so many people have already submitted things. I don't think it's going to change too much.
I really do. I really am eager to see who's gonna take it home. Who's gonna be the one who has first predicted the correct response.
Yeah, after the story finishes, like when we sit down to go through Pale Predictor to get ready for that segment, that's possibly one of the prep sessions I'm looking the most forward to.
Yeah,
Is
totally.
going through things from a year and a half ago, where I imagine there'll be a lot of predictions where somebody got some insane little detail absolutely correct, and then the rest of everything else around it was nonsense. But like you look at that one detail and be like, "Holy shit, how did you pick that?"
Yeah, 100%. Should we dive into the discussion question responses?
Yeah, let's do it.
So yeah, as a reminder, our discussion question was, as we head into the finale, which Kenneteer feels like they're doing the worst at dealing with the issues and who feels like they are doing the best? So we actually got a variety of answers. I mean, we didn't
Yeah,
get any Lucy's, did we? Yeah. Oh, we got Vice Versailles mentioned that they thought Lucy wasn't doing that well, but Vice Versailles kind of talked about all the Kenneteers, so
yeah. Um, yeah, I think there are a lot of people who sort of expressed concerns around all of them, but you're right. I don't think anyone specifically like opened with Lucy is doing the worst.
yeah.
Yeah, to touch on Vice Versailles' answer, because I really liked their lens. Vice Versailles basically opened with asking the question, "What do we actually mean by dealing with their issues?" And they kind of divided dealing into two categories, which is, are you coping or are you fixing?
Mm.
Um, and so they first brought up Avery, who is doing quite a good job of coping right now. Like she's got this move, and that's very stressful, but she is seemingly doing a pretty good job of just like pushing that shit till after this confrontation.
Yeah.
Like she has been mostly doing kind of fine sitting on it, and that part's a little bit arguable, but I think like I think that that's fair. Like I've gotten the impression that, unless something goes seriously wrong, she will be able to sit on it for another 24 hours.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I've definitely got the same vibe.
Vice Versa also says that Avery has like fixed a lot of things. Like we had that great moment between her and Pam about an arc ago. And there was sort of follow up to that where she's really started to reflect on changing how she views relationships. Um, she also just hasn't totally been holding this move on her own shoulders. She did tell her dad. She told Toad Swallow like she's been fixing a lot and seems to be coping with the bits she hasn't actively fixed. So Vice versa, I seem to think Avery's doing pretty well.
Fair
Um,
enough.
Whereas they then went on to say Lucy's kind of a bit the opposite. She's doing the worst at coping. She's been a bit extra snappy and stubborn recently, but is arguably doing the best at actively working towards fixing what she's aware of. Like when she had problems with Verona, she immediately reached out to her network to get support. She's been actively considering her whole like knife versus smoke dichotomy. Like once she realizes something's a problem, she is one of the best at actively jumping up and fixing it.
Actually taking
Yeah.
steps.
Which I think is fun because arguably that would make her coping, or her failure at coping, part of her ability to fix things. Because it's like the fact that she can't cope means they become a big problem a lot quicker, which means she fixes them quicker. Um, which is a point of comparison brings us to Verona, who is Vice Versa described it as Verona is built to cope, which I thought was a very accurate phrasing. But essentially, yeah, like Verona will cope with shit, but she copes with it for too long, and it all sort of boils over eventually.
Yeah.
And Vice Versa worries that like being away from her dad will maybe have like lowered her resistance to being able to cope with him. Like we've seen how bad her interactions have been with him since having that break from needing to cope. But to be fair to Verona, Vice Versa doesn't know what the fix for her situation is, which I think is a very good point.
Yeah.
So their summary was essentially Verona is doing the worst because all she's really doing is coping and she's not doing that great with it. but
Yeah.
also that feels unfair because I don't know how she's supposed to do better.
Yeah. What? Yeah. God. I mean, it's rough, isn't it? Because I definitely have Verona in my head as the answer to this question, but also
Yeah.
it is a bit unfair of a question, isn't it? Like, Verona is just in a really rough spot through no fault of her own, you know?
Yeah, well, and this is a debate that's been going on since 9.9, where we realized she had to leave her dad's house. It's like, yeah, but
What can
where
she
the hell else
do?
can she
Yeah.
go?
Yeah.
Because it comes down to, is she willing to leave Kennet? And so far, the answer has been a very adamant no.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that, I mean, like a lot of people have talked about this, like with Avery potentially leaving, is that an option Verona will allow herself to reconsider at one point? Not saying she has to, but like
Mm.
with the idea that Avery's leaving, I think it's worth at least asking herself if that's what she should do.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of great thoughts from Vice Versa here, definitely. Who else's answers did you like, Elliot? We got an answer from Animal City, who said Avery and Verona doing worse than Lucy. I think Lucy got off pretty easy, but this chapter definitely put Lucy in a worse spot, eh? So maybe this chapter is the one that starts to turn it around for Lucy
Yeah, I do think
in a bad way. Yeah.
most of these answers were written before John tore Lucy's heart out and stomped on it
Or
in this
even
chapter.
even
Oh, and Jazz, yeah.
1310. Yeah, totally.
I guess it's interesting. I wonder how many other people. I would almost just count that as being part of the finale at this point, like because that's so directly tied into
Yeah.
Marisica shenanigans during the climax. It almost doesn't feel like that is her headspace going into finale. That's her headspace inside of the finale.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, it's a fair thought. You're right. It's maybe doesn't quite count as finale stuff, does it? It's probably a bit
Yeah.
pre-finale.
I mean, what was funny about Animal City's answer is they were basically like, I'm worried about Avery because uh, she's left this bombshell to explode during the finale of her moving. And Animal City's particularly worried about how Verona will respond to that news,
Yeah.
which I think is fair.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But then Animal City went on to say, whereas Lucy overall has her personal life to fall back on, although they're worried that might get pulled apart in the finale.
Yeah.
And I think this answer was written like just a little bit after 1310 came out. So yeah, Animal City basically saying Lucy seems fine, but also we just watched her shit get torn up, so let's see.
Yep. We shall see. I whose did I really like? I did like Gyroda calling out Verona is in a strange place, in a most worried about place. Avery is is seemingly doing moderately well, but also is about to go into the Thunder Bay house. I guess again, similar to how we said earlier in the show, like Verona's in a spot where the story's going to be over before we see the real long-term effects of her living with her dad, so we won't have to worry about it. I guess that's a similar thing for Avery. And she has Snowdrop, I suppose, which helps level it out.
Yeah, I wanted to play out this one quote from Gyroda's answer, which I just really loved, which was sort of their ending to their answer.
Yeah.
Where they say, as a side note, I want to think about where each Kenneteer was at their lowest.
Yeah.
For Avery, it was before the story with her family and lack of friends. With Lucy, it was probably when she had her outburst early on with Paul.
Yeah.
With Verona, it was when things really kicked off with her dad and he smashed the mask, which is a relatively recent event compared to the other two.
Mm-hmm.
And if we look at where they are since then, Avery now has friends, more than just the trio. She's got Nicolette, Zed,
Yeah.
Liberty, Jude. Lucy has come to a kind of acceptance with her feelings around Paul.
Yep.
She's finding constructing ways to channel her sense of justice. And Verona is going back home to Brett.
Yeah,
And,
what a whammy line that is, hey? Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah.
Like,
I think that's a really good summary of why it feels like Verona is the one that you need to worry about right here. That pretty much sums up.
Yeah, progress that Verona made is while she has been away from her dad. So we'll see.
Yeah, the other two have addressed their problems in really permanent ways, and Verona's going back there, and she now has plans to maybe get a domain afterwards.
Yeah.
But yeah, that still feels like like the domain is absolutely a good thing, but it's also putting a band-aid on a wound. Like it's like ideally she just wouldn't be there in the house. But yeah,
Yeah.
I mean this is the whole thing. As other answers said, there's no fix.
Yeah.
Okay, a last answer I quickly wanted to pull out was from Stuck in Reddit Factory. Who so Stuck in Reddit Factory is on our Discord as well, and very much is pushing a theory constantly that Avery is the protagonist. Avery is Stuck in Reddit Factory's favorite character, and so this is basically some extra propaganda from Stuck in Reddit Factory about how Avery is the
The
protagonist.
best. Yeah.
Well, Stuck in Reddit Factory says Avery is doing the best and the worst. So they talk about how Lucy is like recognizing her problems, but sort of still in the process of really coming up with a plan for change. And there was a great quote where they said, magically speaking, she's still reaching for the dog of war familiar instead of being the eavesdropping smoke. She's trying and failing to convince John with a duel instead of like listening to what he's saying. Whereas Avery is kind of doing the best because Avery is taking much more active steps to fix her problems. She's decided to make this move. Like she told her bosses, like Miss and Toadswallow.
Her bosses. Yeah.
She's been learning to like negotiate and stick up for herself. Like she's becoming a big deal finder. So like she's doing really well in that regard. But then Stuck in Reddit Factory contrasts that with saying Verona is heading back to Brett. Her mask's still broken. Everyone is sort of trying to help her, and she's struggling to accept that help. But she's surrounded by people who are going to help her when push comes to shove. Avery is currently in the process of alienating those around her by not really telling them she's about to move. She's staying quiet, which, as we all know from her backstory, is not a good sign for her. And she's also like trying to lean more into the wolf after being betrayed by people like Cleo. So yeah, Stuck in Reddit Factory claiming Avery is doing simultaneously the best and the worst because she is the protagonist.
I mean, I do kind of get the vibe, like Avery's refusal to be, telling the other Kedditors what's going on is not a great sign for sure.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a mistake I can understand and almost get behind though, because her point that they don't need that shit dropped on them with the current situation is very valid. Even if it's so transparent that she's just bearing that weight herself instead then. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, that wraps up our discussion question. Sorry. Thanks to everyone who answered.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of great stuff in there for sure. Now, don't fret. We have a new discussion question coming up. This discussion question, I think, will be quite an interesting one. It is John making the right decision? With a special call out of, even though he's pretty much expecting to lose the contest, right?
Yeah. So, like, it's because it's worth pointing out. I feel like the core of the question here that we want to get into is, in either outcome or regardless of outcome, do you think what he did was the right thing here? Like, because there's every chance within 2 weeks we might know if he's going to win it or not. Like, he might be dead in 2 weeks. But I don't feel like that should change people's answers to this discussion question, because I'm more interested in, at this current point in time, having known he's entered it to do this, regardless of whether he wins or loses, do you think that was the right call?
Yeah.
I feel like that's it's gonna be really interesting to hear people's opinions on where they stand on that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one for sure. Who knows? What do you want to give us your answer to this one, Elliot? Do you want to wait until we revisit it in a fortnight's time?
Yeah, let's come back to it. I don't know that I have an answer I'm like confident
Ready
in
to
backing
go on.
right now.
Yeah.
I feel like I could go with my gut instinct, but I don't necessarily want to have to stick to that.
Fair enough. But yeah, you can leave your answers to the discussion question in the show notes. In the discussion thread, which we linked in the show notes down below.
Yeah, nice try segueing straight into the outro, but I'm also going to ask you if you have an answer yet.
And I think
Trying
he's
to get
making
out
the
of it by
wrong.
going straight into the outro. Like, I don't know what you're doing.
I hate to say it. I think he's making the wrong decision. I think he's doing the self-sacrificial play, and I get it. Like, I get the appeal of it. 100% I do. But nah, sorry, John. I think you're making the wrong call here, pal.
It's interesting. My gut decision was that it's the right call.
Ooh, ooh.
That's fine. Hopefully the audience is as divided as we are.
Yeah, it's a tough one for sure.
But yes. So yeah, talk about that in the discussion thread. Talk about whatever in there. You can also check us out on Twitter. That's where the live reads go. We also tweet about some other stuff. So yeah, check it out if you want news about other things. We're going. I think we're quickly reaching the point where we're going to be making extra special announcements about All Packed Up 2 and stuff on that Twitter feed as well. So if you want to know sort of about the stuff that's going to be happening that's All Packed Up 2 related before the actual stream, that'll be the place to find out.
Yeah. Make sure you check out the website as well, doofmedia.com. It's a pretty good website. It's got a lot of fun games on it.
That's like,
I know you hate it when I say it. That's why I say it, Elliot.
It's like every 6 months you just make that joke again. Like, I'm not going to remember that you've been doing it every 6 months for like 5 years now.
It's got all kinds of fun games. It's got like reviews, cool tech tips, all kinds of great stuff. That's doofmedia.com.
Yeah, like, so speaking of the network as a whole, next week is actually our Doof and Chill. So those of you who are patrons, we're going to be playing around with the format of that a bit, I think, this week. Scott was going to look into that, so I don't know exactly where he's at that, but yeah, if you're a patron, we'll be doing that Doof and Chill, and it should be a really fun, different kind of Doof and Chill, hopefully.
Yeah, I think it'll be quite a fun vibe. We shall. Yeah, I think the Doof and Chills always have fun vibes to them because they're chill, and that's what people need nowadays. It's just a nice chill vibe, I reckon.
Yeah. And so yeah, if you're not a patron, patreon.com/doofmedia. Check it out. That's how you can get access to this Doof and Chill. And if the teaser of It'll Be Cool isn't specific enough for you, that's fair.
How dare you? How dare you, Elliot?
Well, that's an excuse to go back to the previous call out. That's where you go to Twitter, because once it's actually confirmed that it'll be a thing, we'll talk about it on Twitter.
Yeah.
And so then you can get the specific. I just don't want to talk about it right now, because if it doesn't work out, I don't want to promise something we can't deliver on.
Yeah.
So once we know what it is, you can check it out on Twitter, and then you can be like, oh, that sounds amazing.
It was cool. Ruben was
have
right.
all of my spare money.
Yeah.
Don't give us all your money, but all the spare money.
Yes. So, of course, that money, to do that, you can go to the Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia and become a supporter of the network and help us keep making shows like this one and all the other ones.
Yep. And don't forget to subscribe to Wildbow's Patreon with the other half of all your spare money. Because, he just broke all of our hearts this week. And that's a sign of good writing, so he deserves money for it.
Frequency of heartbreaks is one of the top metrics that an author can aspire for.
If you didn't like that shit, I don't know what you're still doing in Wildbow stories at this point.
Definitely a fair call.
You clearly love it when he causes you pain. Give him money for it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But I guess that sound like a dominatrix.
That's the end of the. That's the end of the show. Yeah. So yeah, if you want to give your money to the dominatrix Wildbow, go to his Patreon, and otherwise, we'll see you next time.